Chapter 371. Go to the net. Zhou Ping, who had been guarding beside her, quickly asked, "Master, have you found that madman?" The Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling, said coldly, "Yes." Zhou Ping asked angrily, "Who is it? Who dares to be so arrogant?" Zhang Ling said in a cold voice, "I thought it was someone who dared to be so arrogant as to strike Mount Longhu with lightning. I didn't expect that the person I was tracking would take a detour and finally return to Mount Gazao." Zhou Ping gasped. "External alchemy? Gazao sect? No way." Zhang Ling sneered and said, "Why is it impossible? The Gazao sect has always been at odds with us. They compete fiercely with us in business. A while ago, when the Renyuan Jindan appeared, some people from our sect also went to snatch it. It's normal for Wan Yuan to hold a grudge. Go to the internet." 7K. Oath M. I just didn't expect that Wan Yuan would be so despicable now and do such a shameless thing. Zhou Ping said hatefully, "Are we just going to take this lying down?" Zhang Ling stood up and laughed. "A small Gazao sect dares to bully us. Humph. Wan Yuan is really tired of living. Let's go and ask for an explanation." At first, Zhou Ping looked happy, but soon she hesitated and asked, "Master, the Gazao sect is a big sect of the external alchemy. I'm afraid it's not good for us to go there like this. Do you want to inform the sect leader first?" Zhang Ling glanced at Zhou Ping. "What? Does the leader have to ask about everything in the Xueqi school? Can't I, the elder sister of the leader, make the decision? Wan Yuan dared to be presumptuous in our Mount Longhu. Why can't we go to Mount Gazao? In a word, are you going or not? If not, I'll go alone." After that, she snorted coldly and instantly turned into a blue light and left. Zhou Ping was stunned for a moment. She gritted her teeth, stomped her feet, and chased after her. On Mount Gazao, Li Yundong and the others were stunned when they saw Yan Feng appear. Li Yundong wrote on Zi Yuan's back. "Was it Liuha that attacked Liujia Yongshan talisman just now?" Zi Yuan looked back at Li Yundong, nodded slightly, and said, "Yes." Li Yundong wrote again, "Why don't you seize the sword, capture Yan Feng, and force her to tell us where Ao Wushuang is?" Zi Yuan immediately said resolutely, "No, the current situation is unclear. We can't act rashly." As if to prove Zi Yuan's words, Yan Feng looked down at the side hall of the Gazao sect from midair. She sneered and said, "Wan Yuan, when did you learn to provoke people with words?" Soon, a man flew out of the side hall. He was wearing a Taoist robe and a Taoist crown. He held a horsetail whisk in his left hand and a ruler in his right. Li Yundong looked up and saw that the man was about 1.7 meters tall. He had a goatee under his chin, deep eyes, and a high nose. He seemed to be a foreigner. Judging from his face, he seemed to be about 40 years old. Li Yundong was secretly surprised. Is this mixed-race guy Wan Yuan, the master of the Gazao sect of the external alchemy? Sure enough, the middle-aged man looked at Yan Feng with sharp eyes and said, "Yan Feng? You really didn't die. I didn't expect the rumors to be true. I guess it's also your doing that the various sects are besieging the Fox Zen school?" Yan Feng snorted coldly and said, "So what?" Wan Yuan smiled slightly and cupped his hands. "Zhenren Yan. Good method. I admire you." Yan Feng snorted arrogantly, her nose pointing to the sky. Seeing that she was so arrogant in his territory, Wan Yuan was secretly displeased, so he asked in a deep voice, "I just don't know why Zhenren Yan has come here so late at night." Yan Feng glanced around intentionally or unintentionally, and the Liuha in her hand let out a clear dragon's roar. She sneered and said, "I'm here today to catch a few rats." Wan Yuan was secretly angry. He frowned and shouted, "Zhenren Yan, I've seen that you've endured humiliation for 9 years for revenge, so I respect you a little. Don't push your luck and be too presumptuous." Yan Feng raised her head and laughed wildly. "So what if I'm presumptuous? So what if I'm not presumptuous? I can come and go as I please on your Mount Gazao. What can you do to me?" Wan Yuan was so angry that his face turned pale. He said angrily, "Yan Feng, you've gone too far. Today, I'll make sure you can't leave." Yan Feng said sarcastically, "Humph you? Don't joke around. I'm afraid you don't know how many rats have come to your mountain, do you?" After that, Yan Feng pointed her sword in the direction of Li Yundong and the others and shouted sternly, "Scoundrel, come out by yourself. Could it be that you want me to chop off your head again?" These words made Su Chan angry. She was about to jump out, but Li Yundong calmed down. He grabbed Su Chan and waved at her. Zi Yuan also nodded approvingly at Li Yundong and said, "Don't get excited. Yan Feng might not know where we are." As soon as she finished speaking, a man suddenly jumped up from the wall behind them. The man stood on the yellow glazed tiles of the wall, cupped his hands, and said, "Zhenren Yan, you have good eyesight. I admire you." Su Chan was shocked and looked up. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan also turned their heads and saw that the man was short and fat. He was Dang Chong of the Panglai sect, who had participated in the siege of the Fox Zen school before. When Yan Feng saw him, she frowned and said, "Why are you here?" Dang Chong reached out and touched his scalded head with a smile, saying, "Why can't it be me? Is there someone else?" Yan Feng said in a deep voice, "I'm not talking about you." Dang Chong patted his forehead and said loudly, "Oh, I was fooled. I fell for your bluff. Alas, I'm so damn stupid." As he said this, he turned around and shouted behind him, "Hey, friends who are hiding, hurry up and show yourself. I've already exposed myself. There's no reason for you to hide, right?" But after he finished shouting, his voice was sent far away. Only the sound of insects responded to his voice. Dang Chong turned around and said with a smile, "Zhenren Yan, look, there's no one here." Yan Feng sneered and said, "No one? Humph. Could it be that those who were hiding were all ghosts? Come out, stop hiding. If I really force you out, it won't be good." With that, she shook her hand, and the Lyoha sword in her hand flew into the air. With a buzzing sound, one sword turned into two swords, two turned into four swords, and in a short while, it turned into countless sharp swords, hanging in the air, ready to attack. With a buzzing sound, it made a clanging sound, and the momentum was very terrifying. Dang Chong also turned around and howled again. "Damn it, why are you hiding? Do you want to show yourself after being pierced by 10,000 swords?" As soon as he finished speaking, another person jumped up from the wall not far away. Li Yundong and the others took a closer look and saw that the man was tall and slender, with strong limbs and two sword-like eyebrows. It was Du Fei, the jade-faced golden monkey. Du Fei stood on the wall, cupped his hands, and said indifferently, "Zhenren Yan is really domineering. You actually forced me to show myself with the myriad sword formation." When Dang Chong saw him, he immediately laughed and said, "Oh, Zhenren Du, nice to meet you. Why are you here?" Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, who were in the corner, were also tongue-tied. They thought to themselves, "Yeah, why is this guy here?" Du Fei didn't like Dang Chong's cheeky appearance. He snorted and didn't look at Dang Chong. He just cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan and said, "Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon Sect greets Master Wan." Wan Jinyuan had not noticed that people had jumped out one after another from outside the wall of the Taoist temple. His face was very ugly. He reluctantly cupped his hands and said with a fake smile, "Zhenren Du, why are you in the mood to come here so late at night?" Although Du Fei had a straightforward temper and was not good at socializing with people, nor was he good at beating around the bush with people, he was not a fool. He did not immediately explain his purpose of coming. Instead, he turned to look at Yan Feng. "Zhenren Yan, what are you doing here?" Yan Feng hadn't expected that she would force two unrelated people to come out after forcing them twice in a row. This was really a case of the East not being bright, the West not being bright. She frowned and said coldly, "Do I need to tell you why I'm here? Zhenren Du, are you here alone?" Du Fei snorted and said, "Of course. Do you think I have an accomplice?" Yan Feng laughed and said, "Then I'll have to ask you." After saying that, she suddenly took a deep breath and shouted, "All of you, show yourselves." This loud shout contained the kung fu of the Xianmen sect. It made the mountains tremble, the peaks and valleys echo, and the earth tremble. Li Yundong's cultivation was excellent and his foundation was deep, so he could naturally resist it. However, he knew that Su Chan would definitely not be able to resist it, so he immediately covered her ears with his hands. Behind them, Dang Chong, who was on the wall above them, was immediately shaken and fell off the wall with a cry of pain. Du Fei's body also shook, and his face suddenly turned from normal to reddish gold, and then from reddish gold to normal. Wan Jinyuan's body, which was floating in the air, also shook slightly. He said with a cold face, "Yan Feng, you are too presumptuous. This is the ancestral court of our Gazao sect. It's not your place to shout." Yan Feng sneered and said, "The ancestral court of the Gazao sect is like a vegetable garden. You, the sect leader, don't even know how many people are here. How ridiculous." As soon as she finished speaking, people jumped up one by one from the wall. They all had ugly expressions on their faces. Some rubbed their chests with their hands, while others cupped their hands and reported their sections. "I am Zhang Hongqing of the Jinshan sect. I am Chen Anji of the Donghua sect. Greetings, Master Wan and Zhenren Yen." "Zhenren Yen, Master Wan. I am Ning Shoka of the Yuyang sect." Li Yundong, Su Chan, and Zi Yuan watched as one cultivator after another jumped out from behind the wall. They could only stare blankly and stare blankly. Li Yundong thought to himself, "Oh my god, how many people are hiding outside the Gazao sect? I thought we were the only ones who came to the Gazao sect at night. I didn't expect that there would be so many companions." There were about a dozen of them. In the end, an old man with white hair and a ruddy face jumped up the wall with a beautiful young woman. He cupped his hands and said to the people around him with a smile, "I am Zhang Yuan of the Yinyang sect of Mount Wuhua. This is my disciple, Lu Fengping." When Li Yundong saw him, he immediately frowned, and there was a murderous look in his eyes. Especially when he saw Ding Nan beside him. His frown deepened. He thought to himself, "Is Ding Nan going further and further on this road of no return?" When Su Chan saw Zhang Yuan, her eyes widened. She reached out and pulled Li Yundong's arm, then wrote in his palm, "It's Zhang Yuan, our big enemy. What should we do?" Chapter 372. Go to watch net. Li Yundong patted Su Chan's palm, shook his head gently at her, and then wrote, "Calm down. Let's wait and see. Go to watch net." 7K. Oath M. At this time, Yan Feng hadn't expected that her loud shout would force so many people to come out. She was also a little stunned and didn't say anything for a long time. Her face was gloomy. On the other hand, Wang Jinyuan's expression was very interesting. He hadn't expected that there would be so many people hiding under his nose. He said with an extremely ugly expression, "Who else is there? Come out together." At this time the short, fat Dang Chong slowly climbed up from the top of the wall, waved his hands and said, Me too." Wang Jinyuan had nowhere to vent his anger, so he immediately waved his hand. A gust of strong wind suddenly burst out of his sleeve, shaking Dang Chong off the wall again. A row of cultivators from various sects standing on top of the wall burst into laughter. However, Wang Jinyuan's face turned blue. He shouted, "Do you really think my Gazao sect is a vegetable garden? How dare you be so presumptuous? Who else is there? Get out here." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a gloomy voice coming from the air. A young woman and a young girl descended from the sky. Both of them were dressed in Taoist robes. One of them had her hands in her sleeves, and the other had a long sword on her back. They were slim and graceful. The young woman stared at Wang Jinyuan coldly and said, "Wang Jinyuan, I'm being presumptuous. What are you going to do?" Wang Jinyuan took a closer look at the woman and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. Yan Feng, who was not far away, also suddenly changed her expression. Li Yundong knew that the beautiful girl next to the woman was Zhou Ping, but he saw that the woman next to Zhou Ping was ordinary, and the red cinnabar mole between her eyebrows was particularly eye-catching. Wang Jinyuan and Yan Feng had not been so shocked when so many people jumped out before, but when they saw this woman, their expressions suddenly changed. This woman was obviously not an ordinary person. Li Yundong couldn't help but write on Zi Yuan's back and ask, "Who is this person?" Zi Yuan's face was also solemn. She sent a voice transmission to Li Yundong and said slowly, "This is Zhang Ling, the elder sister of Taoist Zhang, the leader of Zhengyi school. She is known as the Lady of the Earthly Fire." Li Yundong's expression couldn't help but change. He quickly wrote on the back of Zi Yuan, "Could it be the person who shouted at Mount Longhu before?" Zi Yuan slowly nodded to Li Yundong. Li Yundong's expression suddenly froze. When he had struck Mount Longhu with lightning, Zhang Ling's angry shout had almost shaken Li Yundong up from the ground. What kind of cultivation was this? This kind of cultivation was simply terrifying. Li Yundong secretly calculated in his heart that if he fought with her head-on, his chances of winning would be less than 30%. Su Chan, the little fox, suddenly found that there were so many Taoist masters around her. She was so scared that she didn't even dare to breathe. She clung to Li Yundong with both hands and refused to let go, for fear that he would disappear in the next second. Li Yundong's heart was also pounding. He thought to himself, this Zhang Ling can't be chasing after me, can she? If she takes the initiative to make trouble for me, and Yan Feng also joins in the fun, I'm afraid that I will die here today. It doesn't matter if I die, but what about the girl? What if I get Zi Yuan into trouble? Li Yundong quickly calculated in his heart. Just as he was thinking, there was suddenly a change in the field. Zhang Ling's appearance made Wang Jinyuan's expression change. He looked at Zhang Ling with great vigilance and said in a deep voice, "It turns out that the Lady of the Earthly Fire has come. I'm sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhang Ling smiled coldly and didn't say anything. Zhou Ping, who was next to her, said loudly, "Wang Jinyuan, don't do that. Tell me, where were you in the first half of the night?" Wang Jinyuan was already depressed enough tonight. There were so many people hiding under his nose, but he hadn't noticed them. At this time, there was a little girl pointing at his nose and shouting. No one could stand this, let alone he was the leader of a generation and the leader of a sect. The unhappiness in Wang Jinyuan's heart had reached its peak. He said angrily, "Who are you? How dare you shout in front of me?" Zhou Ping was so angry that her face turned red. Just as she was about to speak, she saw Zhang Ling raise her hand and stop her. Zhou Ping glared at Wang Jinyuan angrily, then stood behind Zhang Ling and glared at Wang Jinyuan. Zhang Ling couldn't help looking Wang Jinyuan up and down. She asked coldly, "Master Wan, didn't you just ask me to get out? I'm out now. What can I do for you?" Wang Jinyuan was furious to be questioned in such a strange way, but he was very afraid of Zhang Ling's strength, so he suppressed his anger and said, "The Lady of the Earthly Fire must be joking. But why did you come here so late at night? What can I do for you?" Zhang Ling snorted. She stared at Wang Jinyuan sharply and said, "I have nothing else to do. I just want to ask you where you were in the first half of the night." Wang Jinyuan's face changed. "Zhang Ling, are you interrogating me like a criminal?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "If you don't have a guilty conscience, why would you say that?" Wang Jinyuan could no longer control his anger. The blue veins on his forehead bulged. He suppressed his anger and said, "Do I need to tell you where I was in the first half of the night?" Zhang Ling didn't want to tell him that Mount Longhu had been struck by lightning. She didn't want to become a laughingstock with so many people present, so she kept asking about Wang Jinyuan's whereabouts in the first half of the night. At first, she had some doubts in her heart, but when she saw that Wang Jinyuan refused to tell her where he had been in the first half of the night, she suddenly became suspicious and became more and more certain that it was Wang Jinyuan who had struck Mount Longhu. Zhang Ling raised her head and laughed, saying, "If you don't want others to know, don't do it. You refuse to answer such a simple question, so it can be seen that you do have a guilty conscience. Master Wan, I'm afraid you didn't expect that I already knew what you had done." Wang Jinyuan's face changed dramatically. Zhenqi suddenly gushed out of his body, and purple qi surrounded him. He said murderously, "What did you find?" Seeing Wang Jinyuan's fierce expression, Zhang Ling immediately shouted, "Wang Jinyuan, you finally admit it. Humph, well, let me test the strength of the #1 master of external alchemy today." After that, she took out her hands from the wide sleeves of her Taoist robe, revealing a pair of crimson hands. Zhang Ling suddenly clapped her hands, and there was a loud bang in front of her. The ground under her feet shattered into countless cracks, and dark red flames could be faintly seen surging under these cracks. Countless flames rose from the ground and surrounded Zhang Ling's palms, gathering into a raging and burning fire dragon. The cultivators on the wall gasped and said in surprise, "What's going on? Why did they start fighting without saying a word?" Wang Yuan also began to act as a peacemaker. "The Lady of the Earthly Fire, Master Wan, listen to me. Don't fight first. What the hell is going on? If you want to fight, why don't you let us figure it out first?" Zhang Ling was proud and arrogant. Except for her younger brother, who was the leader of the sect, she did not respect anyone in the world. She immediately shouted at Zhang Yuan unceremoniously, "It's none of your business. Who asked you to talk?" Zhang Yuan's face changed, and a ferocious look flashed in his eyes. However, he quickly controlled himself and said to Wang Jinyuan with a smile, Master Wan, if you have something to say, we can talk it out. Why do you have to fight? Wang Jinyuan's face was gloomy. He looked at the cultivators on the wall with an unfriendly gaze and sneered. Talk it out? Well, tell me what you are here for tonight. If you don't make it clear, none of you will leave alive today. Wang Jinyuan's words made the faces of these cultivators change greatly. Some of them with bad tempers immediately began to curse. Wang Jinyuan's face became more and more ferocious, and his murderous aura became stronger and stronger. Seeing the murderous aura on the field, Dang Chong suddenly rolled his eyes and said loudly to Yan Feng, Zhenren Yan, you've forced us all out. Do you want to take advantage of the situation? Yan Feng didn't expect that her loud shout would force so many people to come out. Seeing that the situation on the field was getting more and more chaotic, she really wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight and reap the benefits. But when she heard Dang Chong's words, her wishful thinking was seen through, and she was dragged into the chaos and couldn't get out. She couldn't help but curse, you short man, what bullshit are you talking about? Dang Chong fanned his nose with his hand and laughed loudly. It stinks. I'm not talking nonsense. You really wanted to force us out just now. That's why so many things have happened. Wang Jinyuan couldn't help but shout. Why did so many people come to my Gazao sect so late at night? Wasn't it enough to snatch the Renyuan Jin Dan last time? Do you really think our Gazao sect is a pushover? Dang Chong giggled and said, Master Wan, you guessed right. We're really here for the Renyuan Jin Dan. Wang Jinyuan's expression changed. He said angrily, Didn't you already take the Renyuan Jin Dan? Why are you here again? At this time, Du Fei suddenly said, Master Wan, to tell you the truth, I recently heard that there is a second Renyuan Jin Dan in the Gazao sect, so I came to the Gazao sect to find out. As soon as Du Fei finished speaking, the cultivators of the other sects also nodded in agreement. Yes, we also heard the rumor, so we came to have a look. If there really is a second Renyuan Jin Dan, Master Wan, we are willing to buy it at a high price. That's right, Master Wan. How much do you want? Name a price. Yes, we can also exchange powerful magical weapons with you, as long as you say so. As Wang Jinyuan listened to the chaotic voices of these cultivators, he couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. As he laughed, the purple qi on his face became more and more vigorous, as if his whole body was shrouded in a thick cloud of purple mist. He laughed for a while, then glanced at Zhongling coldly and said, You're here to make trouble out of nothing. Then he glanced at Yan Feng and said, You're here to put the blame on others. As he said this, Wang Jinyuan glanced at the cultivators on the wall and sneered, You're here to take advantage of the situation. Wang Jinyuan spat out a stream of purple qi from his nose. Gradually, the purple qi around him slowly transformed into a pattern of Tai Chi and 8 diagrams. He shook the horsetail whisk in his hand and said ferociously, It's not enough to steal a Renyuan Jin Dan. You actually came here again. Very good, very good. It seems that you really don't take me, the master of the Gazao sect, seriously. Today, none of you can leave. After that, he flicked the horsetail whisk in his hand and shot out 2 gusts of gang wind, fiercely whipping toward Zhongling and Yan Feng at the same time. Zhongling saw that the gang wind was coming fiercely. If she was hit, it would be no different from being hit by a steel whip. She shouted, Come on! With a fierce wave of her hand, a blazing fire dragon suddenly rushed toward Wang Jinyuan. Yan Feng sneered and didn't move at all. The Liuha behind her blocked the gang wind with a clang, then turned into countless flying swords and rushed toward Wang Jinyuan. The scene suddenly became chaotic. 16b. Chapter 373. Go to watch net. When the cultivators of the major sects saw the 3 of them fighting, they were shocked. Some of them also took action, trying to persuade the 3 of them to leave. Du Fei raised the golden stick in his hand and smashed it at Yan Feng's flying sword. He shouted, Don't fight. Let's talk it out. Seeing that the situation was in chaos, Zhang Yuan smiled sinisterly and quietly released 2 ox-hair needles to stab the cultivators next to him. Go to watch net. 7k. Oath M. These cultivators had not expected that the kind-looking man with white hair and a youthful face would be so cruel and merciless. Suddenly, several of them were hit. Among them, there were some who had their own differences. Now that they were provoked by someone, they immediately cried out in alarm. They looked at the people around them in bewilderment. After exchanging a few glances, they immediately started fighting with each other. Zhang Yuan was overjoyed, but he shouted, "Everyone, don't fight. We are all the same. Let's talk it out." But from time to time, he would play dirty tricks, making the situation more and more chaotic. Ding Nan looked at the chaotic situation in front of her and asked in a low voice, "Master, what's going on?" Zhang Yuan smiled sinisterly and said, "Isn't this better? The more chaotic it is, the easier it will be for us to fish in troubled waters." "Humph, my good disciple, don't you want that Ren Yuan Jin Dan?" Ever since Ding Nan had joined Zhang Yuan's sect, she had heard a lot about the cultivation world from him, especially about the time when the Ren Yuan Jin Dan had appeared and the time when Li Yundong had begun to rise. Ding Nan had privately guessed that Li Yundong had changed so much because he had taken the Ren Yuan Jin Dan. If Li Yundong could suddenly become so powerful after taking the Ren Yuan Jin Dan, what about her? If she also became a great cultivator, would Li Yundong have to look up to her from then on? As soon as Ding Nan thought of this, her heart began to pound. At this time, Li Yundong was dumbfounded. He had never expected that when he and Zi Yuan went to the Linggong sect to get the Five Thunders Jade Book, and then followed a Sherbo of the Fox Zen School to Mount Gazao, they would cause such a big melee. He couldn't help but look at Zi Yuan. He wanted to ask her opinion and see what they should do now, but when he turned his head, he saw that Zi Yuan was also dumbfounded. She was staring blankly at the scene and couldn't say a word. Obviously, she was also helpless and had no way to deal with it. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's arm. At this time, the scene was chaotic. She was not afraid of being heard, so she lowered her voice and said, "Yundong, what should we do now?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. "You ask me, but who do I ask?" But just as he was about to speak, he saw that Mei Nyang, who had already been paralyzed with fear, was taking advantage of the fact that the cultivators on the field were fighting and not paying attention to her. She was slowly moving against the corner of the wall, preparing to escape. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He pointed at Mei Nyang with his finger and said in a low voice, "Let's catch Mei Nyang first and find out what's going on." Zi Yuan nodded. "Okay, but it's not good to make a move here. Let's follow her first. Wait until there's no one around before we make a move." Li Yundong understood. He pulled Su Chan and slowly walked toward Mei Nyang. But Mei Nyang seemed to have never seen such a chaotic scene before. Her legs seemed to have gone soft. She leaned against the wall and moved step by step, unable to move for a long time. Li Yundong saw that although she was leaning against the wall, she was still in the field of fighting and couldn't get out of their sight. Li Yundong thought to himself, "Woman, why don't you run away and stay there to wait for death? Swords have no eyes, let alone fighting." While he was thinking, he suddenly saw Yan Feng shout loudly. Her fingers quickly pinched a few sword spells, and the zhenqi all over her body poured out like a waterfall, causing her black hair to stand on end and the corners of her clothes to dance wildly. The Liuha behind Yan Feng instantly jumped into the vast starry sky and turned into a star in the blink of an eye. Then, an ear-piercing sound of a sword came from the sky, like the roar of a dragon from the ninth heaven. Everyone on the field looked up and saw that the stars in the sky suddenly shook. Then, the stars became brighter and brighter, as if all the stars in the sky had fallen. Seeing this, some cultivators shouted in horror, "This is the unique skill of the Linggong sect, the sword breaks the sky. Everyone, run!" Those with low cultivation immediately fled without a trace, while others immediately released their powerful magical weapons to protect themselves. Wan Zhenyuan snorted coldly and waved the ruler in his hand. Suddenly, a long river of purple mist was formed above his head. This long river was so dense that it looked like a city wall. Zhang Ling slammed her hands on the ground, and with a loud bang, countless cracks appeared on the ground. These cracks were filled with red light, as if magma was surging. She grabbed out with her 5 fingers and pulled out the scorching hot magma flames from the cracks in the air. Then, she slammed her palms towards the rain of swords that was falling from the sky. Li Yundong saw that the sword rain was so terrifying. Although he, Zi Yuan, and Su Chan were not on the field, even if they were on the sidelines, he could still feel the fierce sword chi coming at him. His skin was pricked by it and had countless goosebumps. This sword rain was much fiercer than the one he had encountered when he had fought with Du Fei before. The strength and range of the attack were not the same as before. Amazing! What kind of magic is this? Li Yunyang was horrified. Although he had the extremely powerful fan of 7 treasures and the mantra Mahamudra with strong close combat ability, he didn't know any of these powerful spells of mass destruction, except for the 5 Thunder Righteous spell, which he had just learned and hadn't started yet. Zi Yuan said sternly, "This is the sword breaks the sky created by the ancestor of our Linggong sect. It is one of the magic spells of the immortal sword. Only with a sword in hand can this move be used." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why?" Zi Yuan said quickly, "Although there are as many magical items in the world as there are hairs on an ox, and each magical item has its own powerful side, in terms of the number of powerful magical items, the immortal sword is worthy of being the king of magical items. Whether it is the 5 great immortal swords of Taoism or the 4 great swords of Buddhism, they are all first-class magical items in the world." As the two of them spoke quickly, countless flying swords in the sky had already arrived in the blink of an eye and fell down. Li Yundong and the others were leaning against the corner of the wall, almost in a blind spot. They were not the first to bear the brunt of the sword rain, but there were still 1 or 2 long swords falling toward them. Li Yundong saw a long sword rushing toward his face like lightning. He subconsciously wanted to catch it with his hand, but Zi Yuan grabbed him and dodged to the side. Li Yundong only had time to tilt his head before he heard a thud. The long sword had already been inserted next to his head. The body of the sword was shaking, making a buzzing sound. Su Chan was also so scared that her whole body turned cold. She saw that the long sword was less than an inch away from her cheek. The little girl was so shocked that her eyes widened. She stared at the long sword, almost as if they were eye to eye. Li Yundong was about to comfort her when he suddenly saw a white light heading straight for Main Yang from the corner of his eye. He was shocked and blurted out, "Oh no, Main Yang!" Zi Yuan and Su Chan immediately turned their heads. They saw Main Yang staring blankly at a long sword coming straight for her, but her body was so scared that she didn't move at all. "It's over. Main Yang is dead." This thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind quickly. Before he could move, he suddenly saw a figure flash by his side. This person waved his hand at the falling flying sword, and a gust of wind suddenly came out of his sleeve. With a clang, the long sword was shaken away. Li Yunyang took a closer look and saw that the man was strong, with a tiger's back and a bear's waist. He was about 1.85 meters tall. He was wearing a Taoist robe. Although the robe was loose, it could not hide the sense of explosive power coming from the inside out. The man flashed by Main Yang's side and quickly carried her toward the side hall. Li Yundong didn't even think about it and immediately said, "Chase." The 3 of them didn't care about being discovered by others and immediately chased after him. Li Yundong saw that the man had entered the side hall. Just as he was about to follow him in, he suddenly saw the man turn around and strike at him with his palm. Li Yundong's Xueqi suddenly burst out, and he raised his hand to meet it with a fixed fundamental seal. With a bang, the palms of the 2 men collided, and the surrounding air trembled with a buzzing sound. At the same time, Li Yundong and the man's palms emitted a crimson light, as if a bolt of lightning had lit up the side hall. With the help of this light, Li Yundong immediately saw the man's appearance and figure. The man looked to be about 30 years old. He was handsome and tall, and had an extraordinary bearing. Although he looked unfamiliar, Li Yundong felt that he was a little familiar. Especially when Li Yundong slapped the man with another Mahamudra, the man's body twisted strangely. This figure made Li Yundong's mind flash, and he blurted out, "You're the guy who peeped at the heavenly Jindan technique in the stone room of the Fox Zen school." The man didn't answer Li Yundong's words. He slipped past Li Yundong. He was holding Main Yang in his arms, so it was not convenient for him to exert his strength. He didn't dare to fight against Li Yundong, not to mention that Zi Yuan and Su Chan were beside him. The man held Main Yang in his arms and fought with Li Yundong's palm. Then, he quickly used the force of Li Yundong's palm to fly back like a cannonball. In the process of retreating, he changed from holding Main Yang horizontally to carrying her on his shoulder like a burden. Main Yang let out a scream and couldn't help shouting, "You bastard." Before she could finish her words, the man pointed at her with his finger, and Main Yang's voice stopped abruptly. Li Yundong saw that the man was going to take Main Yang away, and he had countless questions that he couldn't get answers to. Without thinking about it, he immediately said to Zi Yuan and Su Chan, "Hurry up, don't let him run away. Chase after him." Zi Yuan and Su Chan answered at the same time. As soon as they moved, they saw the man suddenly turn his head, raise his other hand, and suddenly throw out a golden rope. Li Yundong saw the rope rushing toward them. He didn't know what kind of magical item it was, so he just snorted coldly. He quickly made a Mahavairakana Mudra with both hands and slapped it toward the rope. But as soon as he slapped it, Zi Yuan exclaimed in horror, "Don't slap it, it's the fairy-tied rope." As soon as she finished speaking, the fairy-tied rope touched Li Yundong's Mahamudra. The golden rope trembled a little because of the Mahamudra. Then the fairy-tied rope turned from a long golden rope into a golden bolt of lightning, firmly binding Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Su Chan together at lightning speed. 16b. Chapter 374. Go to watch net. The man who had thrown the fairy-tied rope saw that Li Yundong and the others had been tied up and could no longer chase after him. He snorted, carried Mei Nyang, and turned into the backyard. His figure disappeared. Go to watch net. 7k. Oath M. Li Yundong didn't know about the fairy-tied rope, so he touched it rashly. As a result, he was tied up in an instant. Su Chan and Zi Yuan were also unlucky. The little girl only saw a flash of golden light in front of her eyes, and her body was suddenly pushed. Then, she was stuck to her master, face to face, nose to nose. Zi Yuan was no exception. Her figure flashed, but she couldn't escape the bondage of the fairy-tied rope. She was also tied together, staring at Li Yundong, and Su Chan. Li Yundong was depressed. He watched helplessly as the man ran away with Mei Nyang on his shoulder. He subconsciously took a step forward to chase after him, but he was tied up with Su Chan and Zi Yuan. As soon as he took a step forward, Su Chan and Zi Yuan screamed at the same time. Their bodies tilted, and the three of them fell to the ground with a bang. Since Zi Yuan was born, she had never been so embarrassed. Fortunately, the three of them were tied up in the side hall, and the door of the side hall was unlocked. They could clearly hear the sound of the cultivators fighting outside, but they couldn't see what was going on inside. That was why Zi Yuan didn't die of shame. Zi Yuan suppressed her anger and said, "Li Yundong, why are you touching this fairy-tied rope? Don't you know that fairy-tied rope can't be touched? Whoever touches it will be tied up." Li Yundong pressed half of his face against the cold ground, and the other half of his face forced a smile. He laughed dryly and said, "How would I know? Zi Yuan, do you have any idea? Hurry up and take this fairy-tied rope away. It's strangling me." Li Yundong struggled a little. As he struggled, his hands and feet couldn't help but move. As he moved, his hands couldn't help but touch Su Chan's waist and armpits. The little girl couldn't help giggling and twisting her body. As soon as she moved, she squeezed Li Yundong's arm and kept touching Zi Yuan's body. Seeing that Li Yundong's arm was getting closer and closer to her chest, she was shocked and quickly twisted her body to avoid Li Yundong's arm. The three of them tossed and turned, and the immortal binding rope became tighter and tighter. After a while, the three of them were suffocating. Zi Yuan was so anxious that her forehead was covered with sweat. She quickly shouted with difficulty, "Don't move. The more you struggle, the tighter the bindings will be." Li Yundong immediately stopped moving and said with difficulty, I didn't move. Girl, don't move." Su Chan's face turned red. She struggled to say, "I didn't move. It was your hand that touched my waist. I felt itchy." Li Yundong couldn't help complaining, "Can't you just bear with the itch?" Su Chan cried out in grievance, "I can't help it, can I? Besides, you can stay still if I move." Li Yundong immediately cried out in grievance. He shouted, "You're still talking? Which one of you touched my bottom with your knee? F***ck. Do you want me to die without descendants?" As he said this, he glared at Su Chan. "Was it you? Do you want to murder your husband?" Su Chan quickly shook her head. No, it wasn't me." Li Yundong couldn't help but look at Zi Yuan's face. Seeing his gaze, Zi Yuan blushed and couldn't help glaring at him. She said fiercely, "Who told you to put your elbow on my chest?" Li Yundong was stunned. He looked down and saw that his elbow was really on Zi Yuan's chest, causing it to cave in deeply. Li Yundong smiled awkwardly and said dryly, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's a little messy, ahem, a little messy." As he said this, he reluctantly leaned back and tried to pull his elbow out, but as soon as Li Yundong moved, the fairy-tied rope tightened a little. Zi Yuan couldn't hold it anymore and couldn't help shouting, "Don't move. It's tighter. They'll be strangled to death like this. Oh, Li Yundong said, then put his elbow back in. This time, it hit the sensitive spot on Zi Yuan's chest. Zi Yuan was ashamed and angry. Half of her body went limp. She said in a trembling voice, "Please don't move anymore, okay?" Li Yundong laughed dryly and then glared at Su Chan next to him. "Did you hear that? Don't move." Su Chan cried out. "It was obviously you who moved just now. You always blame me. This is not fair." Li Yundong nudged the little girl's nose with his forehead and pretended to be angry. "Nonsense. You are my woman. If I don't blame you, who should I blame?" When Su Chan heard this, her anger disappeared and she felt sweet in her heart. She smiled and said heartlessly, "Bah, who is your woman? You are so shameless." Seeing that the two of them were flirting shamelessly in such a situation, Zi Yuan suddenly felt a sense of defeat and powerlessness. She felt that she couldn't even vent her anger, so she said helplessly, "Can we get rid of this fairy-tied rope first before we talk about anything else?" Li Yundong turned his face and wanted to talk to her, but the three of them were tied too tightly. As soon as he turned his face, his lips immediately touched the tip of her nose. Zi Yuan was caught off guard, and the tip of her nose was touched by Li Yundong's lips. She suddenly blushed and couldn't help but say angrily, "I told you not to move. Didn't you hear me?" Li Yundong had no choice but to turn his face to the side and say to Su Chan with a wronged expression, "Girl, you don't dislike me. I'm talking to you." Su Chan didn't realize that the three of them were in danger at all. She only felt that it was very fun and exciting to be tied up with Li Yundong. She said with a smile, okay, I won't dislike you." Seeing that the two of them were flirting with each other heartlessly, Zi Yuan couldn't help but groan gloomily. "Oh my God, what have I done?" Li Yundong didn't dare to turn his face again. He couldn't help saying, "Zi Yuan, don't complain. We are all tied up. You have many ideas. Hurry up and think of a way." Zi Yuan said angrily, "What can I do? The fairy-tied rope is a powerful magical weapon of Ju Lu Sun. It is very overbearing and powerful. The higher the cultivation of a cultivator, the more afraid they are of this powerful magical weapon. Usually, when they see it, they don't even have time to hide. You, however, reached out and touched it like a fool." Li Yundong said with a wry smile, "How would I know? Why didn't you say so earlier?" Zi Yuan complained, "Do you think I can do it faster than you?" Li Yundong knew that his cultivation was still shallow. He knew a lot of theoretical knowledge about cultivation, but his understanding of magical weapons was really limited. He knew that he was in the wrong, so he smiled dryly. He blinked at Su Chan and changed the topic. "By the way, who is Ju Lu Sun? Was that person just now Ju Lu Sun?" Seeing that Li Yundong was winking at her, Su Chan also cooperated and said, "That's right. Ju Lu Sun is one of the 12 golden immortals of Taoism. If that person was really Ju Lu Sun, then all of us here would be no match for him." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Then how did that person get a powerful magical weapon like the fairy-tied rope?" Zi Yuan had been pressed against her chest by Li Yundong's elbow. She only felt that her chest was numb and soft, and there was an indescribable discomfort all over her body. She became more and more agitated and couldn't help rolling her eyes at Li Yundong. "Don't you still have the fan of 7 treasures? That's the magical weapon of the rock fox. Some of these magical weapons have been handed down for 1 or 2,000 years. Isn't it normal for them to fall into the hands of others now?" Li Yundong seemed to know why Zi Yuan was unhappy, but he didn't dare to answer her. He just smiled dryly and said, "Fairy sister, at least think of a way to get us out of here first. Are we going to be tied up like this? There should be a way to get out." Zi Yuan suppressed her anger and said, "There are only 2 ways to get rid of the fairy-tied rope. First, the owner of the magical weapon recites the incantation, and it will automatically untie itself." As Zi Yuan spoke, she felt that she was being strangled, so she struggled to take a deep breath. As soon as she took a breath, her chest rose up, and her chest pressed against Li Yundong's elbow. Li Yundong could feel it clearly. He felt awkward and strange in his heart, but he didn't dare to show any expression on his face. He smiled bitterly and said, "We can skip this one. I don't think that guy will be merciful and come back to save us. Let's go straight to the next one." After letting out a breath, Zi Yuan felt that something was wrong. She glared at Li Yundong with a red face and continued. There's no need to talk about the other one. This fairy-tied rope is indestructible, and only heavenly thunder can strike it. Do you think that if heavenly thunder comes down, the people tied up in it will be spared? Li Yundong took a deep breath and said, No way. Wouldn't we just be sitting around waiting for death? Su Chan's face was also ashen. She grabbed the corner of Li Yundong's clothes tightly and said, Yundong, are we going to die together? Li Yundong quickly spat and said, Bah, jinx. It's really unlucky. How can you say such unlucky words? Don't talk nonsense. There must be a way. As he spoke, he didn't turn his face, but his eyes were squinting in Zi Yuan's direction. Seeing his strange expression, Zi Yuan found it very funny. Although they were trapped at the moment, Zi Yuan still couldn't help laughing when she thought of Li Yundong's funny actions and expressions because he didn't dare to offend her. The corners of her mouth couldn't help curling up. Seeing her like this, Li Yundong couldn't help but be overjoyed. Zi Yuan, you must have thought of a way, right? I knew it. You're the smartest. Zi Yuan rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said, What can I do? Haven't you heard the name of this magical item? The fairy-tied rope. It specializes in binding immortals. Even if an immortal is tied up, he can't escape. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, But we are not immortals. Zi Yuan said, Human beings are the beginning of immortals. The predecessors of all immortals were human beings. So human beings can also be regarded as half-immortals. Therefore they can also be tied up. Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He said in despair, What should we do? At this time, Su Chan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She blurted out, That's not right. I'm a fox spirit, not a human. You shouldn't tie me up. Hearing this, Li Yundong was stunned. A bolt of lightning suddenly flashed through his mind. He was overjoyed and said, Yes, girl, you're so smart. Zi Yuan's eyes also lit up. She looked at Su Chan and said, Yes, if you can transform into a fox spirit, you should be able to escape. At that time, we might be able to take advantage of your escape to escape as well. Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Yes, let's do that. Girl, you. But before he could finish his words, Su Chan suddenly shook her head like a rattle drum and said loudly, No, I can't transform into a fox spirit. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan were anxious at the same time and asked, Why not? 16b. Chapter 375. Go to watch net. Su Chan's face turned red under the simultaneous questioning of Li Yundong and Zi Yuan. She looked a little embarrassed. The little girl looked at Li Yundong eagerly and said with some difficulty, If I become a fox spirit, you will dislike meal. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was still fussing about this at a time like this? He hurriedly coaxed, Girl, what nonsense are you talking about? It's not like I haven't seen your real body before. Don't be silly. Your master won't dislike you. Go to watch net. 7K. O.M. Su Chan's smart eyes rolled. She thought for a moment and said awkwardly, But, Sister Zi Yuan is here. I'm embarrassed. Zi Yuan sighed, closed her eyes and said, Then I'll close my eyes. Is that okay? Su Chan blinked but didn't say anything. She stared at Li Yundong without blinking. Li Yundong also sighed. Then I'll close my eyes too? Su Chan nodded with a smile. You're not allowed to open them like last time. Li Yundong shook his head helplessly and closed his eyes, looking as if he didn't want to look at her. I'm afraid of you. I won't open my eyes. If I open them, I'll be a puppy. Seeing Li Yundong's solemn promise, Su Chan was relieved. The little girl blinked her eyes and said, Then I'll change. After that, she took a deep breath and spat out a crimson nidin from her mouth. Soon, she transformed into a three-tailed fox spirit. The body of a fox spirit was completely different from that of a human. As soon as Su Chan transformed into a fox, she immediately felt her body relax. She rolled her eyes, moved her limbs, and escaped from the fairy-tied rope with a whoosh. As soon as the little girl landed on the ground, she turned around and swallowed the nidin. In the blink of an eye, she returned to her human form. She opened her eyes and said in surprise, You should have told me before you changed. After that, she said to Li Yundong, The fairy tide rope is loose. Li Yundong was shocked. He opened his eyes and saw that there was indeed a large space around his waist, and it was much easier for him to breathe. Li Yundong was about to move, but Zi Yuan grabbed him and said, "Don't worry. Let's move at the same time." The fairy tide rope's reaction is extremely fast. Su Chan pulled out from the middle before because she is a fox spirit, so the fairy tide rope will not sense her changes and movements. But the two of us are in human form. The moment we move, the immortal binding rope will retract. Li Yundong said. "Then I'll go down and you'll go up?" Zi Yuan said, "All right." Both of them were lying on their sides on the ground, so it was not convenient for them to exert force. At this moment, both of them moved. Just as they were about to exert force, the immortal binding rope suddenly felt movement. Before Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan could exert their strength, the immortal tying rope tied the two of them together again. The fairy tide rope suddenly exerted so much force that their heads bumped against each other. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan cried out at the same time and covered their foreheads with their hands, their faces full of pain. Su Chan burst out laughing and said, "You didn't escape. Your reaction is so slow." Li Yundong covered his forehead and said angrily, "If you want to run, you should at least tell us. You slipped out alone, but we didn't have time to run out." Zi Yuan almost went crazy. She shouted with a broken face, "Oh my God, now it's great. How can we escape? Su Chan, why didn't you tell us?" The smile on Su Chan's face froze, and she said dryly, "I didn't expect." Li Yundong sighed and said, "This is great. The two of us are tied up tightly. We can't run away even if we want to." As he said this, Li Yundong moved a little unwillingly. He felt that although the fairy tide rope was still tightly binding him and Zi Yuan, it was not as suffocating as before. Zi Yuan and Li Yundong were tied together, and their bodies were pressed against each other. They faced each other, and her chest was also pressed against Li Yundong's chest. His strong masculine scent also rushed over her. Zi Yuan only felt that her whole body was hot and weak, and she was extremely anxious. She couldn't help but say to Li Yundong angrily, "Don't move. Don't get so close to me." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "What can I do? Who let this rope tie us so closely?" Because one person was missing, Li Yundong could finally turn his head. He said to Su Chan, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and think of a way." Su Chan was at a loss. "How? What way?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even finding something to cut would be good. Su Chan seemed to wake up from a dream. She quickly turned around and began searching around. Zi Yuan sighed and said faintly, somewhat resigned to her fate, "It's useless. If the fairy tide rope doesn't stop swords and knives, no magical item or sword can cut it." Su Chan snorted and said unhappily, "I don't believe it." She looked around and suddenly saw a mighty and tall statue of Emperor Guan standing in the side hall. This second Master Guan held an incomparably huge green dragon crescent blade in his hand and stood there majestically. Su Chan was overjoyed. She rushed to the statue of Emperor Guan, held the green dragon crescent moon blade with both hands, and pulled hard. Su Chan pulled out half of the green dragon crescent moon blade from the hand of Emperor Guan. Although it was only half, Su Chan felt that it was heavy in her hand. A huge force pulled her back. She was shocked and thought to herself, "Why is this green dragon crescent moon blade so heavy?" When Su Chan took a deep breath, she grabbed the blade of the green dragon crescent moon blade and jumped up. She pulled the long blade hard and pulled it out. Only then did Su Chan find that the green dragon crescent moon blade in her hand was frighteningly heavy. The blade was 3 meters long, and the handle was as thick as a forearm. Moreover, the whole body was made of fine steel. Su Chan put the green dragon crescent moon blade in front of her. She couldn't touch the tip of the blade even if she stood on tiptoe. Su Chan used her chi to make herself fly up. Her fingertips finally touched the blade. She was surprised to find that the blade of the green dragon crescent moon blade was very sharp. It had been sharpened. Su Chan landed on the ground and tried to lift the blade with all her might. She found that she couldn't lift it with both hands. This was no small matter. Su Chan had been able to lift the fan of 7 treasures, which weighed 81 kilograms, as if it were light. She hadn't expected that she couldn't lift the green dragon crescent moon blade in front of her. Su Chan knew her strength very well. If she used her chi to lift something, although it was impossible for her to have the strength of 1,000 kilograms like Li Yundong, she could still easily swing something that weighed 1 or 200 kilograms, and she could barely lift something that weighed a few hundred kilograms. However, the green dragon crescent moon blade in front of her didn't move at all. Does this blade weigh 1,000 kilograms? Su Chan gritted her teeth, held the green dragon crescent moon blade with both hands, and lifted it hard. With a clang, she finally lifted the blade. However, the result of her barely lifting the blade was that as soon as it was lifted, the blade sank behind Su Chan. The little girl let out a cry and almost staggered. However, she was also a cultivator. With the strength of her waist, she suddenly swung the long blade that was over her head in front of her. What Su Chan hadn't expected, however, was that the long knife was nearly 3 meters long. As she swung it forward, the inertia caused her to stumble. She stumbled a few meters after the knife, and the blade slashed down towards the ground with a whoosh. At this time, Li Yundong was discussing with Zi Yuan about sitting up. The two of them had been panting on the ground for a long time, one commanding and the other cooperating. Just as Li Yundong was about to sit up, he saw a white light flash, and a steel blade fiercely slashed towards the top of their heads. Li Yundong was suddenly shocked. He clapped his hands up, and with a snap, his 2 hands clamped the falling steel blade. Because Zi Yuan had her back to Su Chan, she didn't know what had happened for a moment. She subconsciously looked up and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. She saw a sharp steel blade hovering over her head. The blade was so cold that it seemed to be able to break her hair. Even though Zi Yuan was calm, she couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Li Yundong clamped the steel blade with both hands, and his heart was filled with fear. His back was drenched in cold sweat. He raised his head and said angrily, Su Chan. Su Chan held the steel blade with both hands. When she heard Li Yundong call her, she smiled dryly and said, Sorry, I missed. Li Yundong felt a headache coming on and said frantically, Missed? What if you hadn't missed? Am I going to be cleaved in half? Even if I hadn't been cut in half, look, if the blade had come an inch closer, I would have been able to practice the sunflower manual, and you would have been a widow. Su Chan pouted and quickly threw the green dragon crescent blade in her hand to the ground. She rubbed the corner of her clothes with both hands and looked at Li Yundong pitifully. She muttered, I just wanted to help you get rid of the ropes. Li Yundong also threw the other side of the blade to the ground with both hands. He said speechlessly, You're more of a hindrance than a help, don't you know? Su Chan lowered her head lower and lower, and her chin almost touched her chest. Her face was full of grievance. Her lips wriggled, and she muttered in a low voice, You're the one who asked me to help, and you're the one who said that I'm more of a hindrance than a help. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. He glared at Su Chan and said, Forget it. Hurry to the door and see what's going on. Don't let someone suddenly rush in later. That will be a big joke. Su Chan nodded and hurried to the door, looking out through the crack. At this time, she saw that the cultivators on the field were in a mess. Zhang Ling's hands were burning with blazing flames. The golden flames were burning, but they didn't burn her sleeves or hair at all. However, as soon as the flames left her palms, they could immediately burn stones into mud. Wang Jinyuan was sitting cross-legged on a lotus altar made of purple qi. The Chu Qi in his hand had been thrown into the air and was slowly rotating on the lotus throne, vaguely showing a pattern of Tai Chi 8 diagrams. The pattern looked weak, as if it would be broken with a poke, but the center of the 8 diagrams was constantly emitting purple ripples, spreading out layer by layer, like an invisible city wall. Among the 3 of them, Yan Feng's spiritual power was the weakest. Her whole body was emitting dazzling golden light. It was obvious that her yang spirit body had run its spiritual power to the extreme. However, the Liuha in her hand was really powerful and domineering. The violent sword rain just now had made her the most domineering cultivator on the field. Su Chan looked around and saw that there were flying swords everywhere. The Liuha seemed to have transformed into countless long swords, each of which was fighting with the cultivators. The little girl exclaimed, Ah, Yan Feng is so powerful. She's suppressing everyone by herself. Is the Liuha sword so powerful? Zi Yuan was struggling to sit up. Hearing her words, she said, Of course, the magical item of the Liuha sword is weak in one-on-one battles, but it is extremely powerful in group battles. Although Zhang Ling is powerful, she didn't bring a magical item with her, so she suffered a great loss. The Jiuha Yellow River ruler in Wang Jinyuan's hand was a defensive magical item, so its offensive ability was not strong. Therefore, Yan Feng suppressed everyone by herself. "Oh," Xueqi said. She turned her head and was about to look at the field again, but when she did, she was so scared that her soul almost left her body. She saw a flying sword flying in front of the side hall suddenly stop with a buzz. Then, the long sword floated in the air, as if it had sensed her presence. The edge of the sword suddenly turned around, and the tip of the sword stabbed at Xueqi like lightning. The little girl screamed, turned her head, and ran away. As she ran, she shouted, "Help, Yundong, help!" Li Yundong saw her turn her head and run toward him. He didn't know what was going on, so he said loudly, "What are you shouting for? Aren't you afraid of attracting people?" As soon as he finished speaking, the door of the side hall was pierced by a long sword, and a flying sword broke in. The flying sword was like a ferocious bandit. After breaking through the door, it looked around for a moment, then suddenly flew towards Xueqi. 16b. Chapter 376. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong saw the flying sword heading towards Xueqi, he immediately shouted in shock, "Girl, run!" Xueqi was not good at fighting, but she was good at escaping. Seeing the flying sword stabbing towards her, she flashed and narrowly avoided the sword like a slippery fish. Go to watch net. As Xueqi dodged, she shouted, "What are you going to do?" Li Yundong said loudly, "Don't worry about me. I have my own way." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the Lioha suddenly stop in mid-air, as if it had heard Li Yundong's words. It was indignant. The long sword trembled and made a buzzing sound. After a while, one sword was divided into two swords, and the two swords became three swords. Xueqi was shocked and said, "It's splitting." Zi Yuan also shouted in exasperation, "The sword is psychic. Don't talk nonsense, okay? It can understand what you're saying." Now, the characteristic of the Lioha is that it will split into as many swords as it recognizes the number of enemies it has. Let's see what you can do now. What can you do? Li Yundong stared blankly and said dryly, How would I know?" Xueqi was about to speak when she suddenly felt a white light flash in front of her. She subconsciously lowered her head, and the flying sword brushed past her black hair. The sharp edge of the sword cut off a few strands of her beautiful hair. Her hair fluttered in the air and slowly fell. Xueqi knew that if she had been a fraction of a second late, her head would have been cut off. Her heart was pounding with fear. She wanted to escape, but she couldn't bear to leave Li Yundong and run away alone. Xueqi thought quickly. She gritted her teeth and shouted, "This Lioha is really a useless magical item. Even I can't stab it. No wonder it ranks last among the 5 great swords of Taoism." When Li Yundong heard this, he was shocked. "Girl, what nonsense are you talking about? Are you crazy? Are you tired of living?" Sure enough, the Lioha seemed to understand Xueqi's words, and the sword began to tremble violently. The 2 long swords that had been stabbing at Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan also stopped and floated in the air. The tips of the swords slowly turned around and pointed at Xueqi. Xueqi saw the 3 long swords staring at her. Although she was afraid, she still said stubbornly, "Am I wrong? You can't even hit a living person like me, and you only know how to hit 2 weak fellows who are tied up. If you're not useless, then what are you?" The Lioha was furious. The 3 long swords made a sharp sound and instantly turned into 3 white lightning bolts, crazily striking at Xueqi. Without saying a word, Xueqi immediately turned into a wisp of green smoke, turned around, and ran into the inner room. Li Yundong was burning with anxiety. He shouted at Xueqi's figure, "Girl, run away. Run as far as you can." Xueqi's voice came from the back of the house. "Okay, got it." But not long after he finished speaking, Xueqi ran out of the back of the house. Li Yundong was tongue-tied and said loudly, "Why did you come back?" Xueqi shouted, "It's a dead end." Li Yundong said in shock, "That's impossible. Didn't that person just run in with Mei Nyong in his arms?" Zi Yuan reacted very quickly. She immediately said, "There's a secret room." Li Yundong said frantically, "Damn it, what should we do now? Girl, be careful." Xueqi could barely hold on to 1 flying sword, but it was a bit difficult to dodge 3. She rolled and jumped in the side hall, and her figure was so fast that it almost turned into a few afterimages. However, because the space for movement was too small, she was gradually forced into a dead end by the 3 flying swords. A flying sword stabbed at Su Chan's chest. Su Chan twisted her body. Although she avoided being hit in the vital parts, her arm was inevitably cut. The little girl let out a shout, but as soon as her voice came out of her throat, she felt that her shout might make Li Yundong worry, so she quickly closed her mouth and stubbornly dodged the flying swords with difficulty. Li Yundong heard this shout clearly. He saw that the space for the little girl to dodge was getting smaller and smaller, but she refused to let him be distracted and worry. His heart was burning with anxiety and he was extremely angry. Su Chan was Li Yundong's weakness. Seeing that Su Chan was in danger, he immediately put everything behind him. He took a deep breath and was about to use his strength to struggle crazily. Seeing that Li Yundong was about to lose his temper, Zi Yuan was shocked and hurriedly said, No, you can't struggle hard. The harder you try, the stronger the fairy-tied rope will be. In the end, it will strangle us to death. Li Yundong's eyes were red. He gritted his teeth and said, That's better than me watching Su Chan die in front of me. Seeing that Li Yundong had lost his mind, Zi Yuan made up her mind and said loudly, Li Yundong, calm down. Let's find a way to control this Liuha first. Li Yundong roared loudly, We are tied up like dumplings. How can we control it? Zi Yuan saw that Li Yundong's eyes were bloodshot and his face was ferocious. She took a deep breath and calmed down. She said in a low voice, Li Yundong, didn't you control the Liuha last time? Why can't you do it this time? T. How can the last time be compared to this? Last time. Just as Li Yundong was cursing, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind. He was smart and immediately scolded the Liuha. F***ck, you broken copper and iron sword. Don't you know your grandfather anymore? Last time I subdued you and made you obedient. What, you don't dare to cause me trouble this time? Hey, I'm tied up. Don't you dare to provoke me? No wonder you are ranked last among the 5 great swords. This sentence seemed to be a sore point for the Liuha. It suddenly stopped. The 3 flying swords had originally forced Su Chan into a corner, but at the same time, they turned their blades and rushed at Li Yundong with murderous intent, making buzzing sounds. They were like an enraged warrior glaring at his opponent. When Su Chan saw that the Liuha had stopped, she quickly jumped out of the blind spot. She also put her hands on her hips and shouted at the Liuha, You piece of trash, you can't even stab me for a long time. You're really useless. Li Yundong was stunned, and so was the Liuha. It seemed to be hesitating for a moment, not knowing who to deal with first. Seeing this, Li Yundong quickly continued to curse the Liuha. The filthy words he used made Zi Yuan frown. The Liuha pointed the tip of the sword at Su Chan and then at Li Yundong in the air. It seemed to have been scolded so much that it didn't know who to attack first. Seeing that the Liuha had been scolded silly, Su Chan and Li Yundong were secretly happy and scolded it even more vigorously. The Liuha flew into a rage out of humiliation and let out a sharp sword cry. Suddenly, 2 of the long swords went straight to Li Yundong, and one went straight to Su Chan. Su Chan let out a loud cry. As she ran, she cursed and circled around the side hall with the long sword. However, Li Yundong shouted, Come on! His hands were outside. Seeing a long sword coming straight at his waist, he saw it accurately. He stretched out his hand and flicked the blade of the long sword with his finger. With a clang, the long sword was immediately bounced away, and the other long sword stood up and slashed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong quickly shouted at Zi Yuan, Zi Yuan, don't move. Cooperate with me and take a step to the left. Before Zi Yuan could react, she heard Li Yundong's voice and subconsciously took a step to the left. With a muffled sound, the long sword slammed heavily into the fairy-tied rope that was binding the 2 of them. There was a loud bang in Zi Yuan's mind. She instantly remembered the psalm that her master had left for her. The spiritual mirror is easy to break, and the immortal sword can't break the red rope. Zi Yuan's head was buzzing. She subconsciously opened her mouth and shouted in her mind, Master, you're right again. Your psalm has come true again. Li Yunyang saw that Zi Yuan was staring blankly into the distance. She seemed to be in a daze and didn't react at all. He didn't have time to call out to her, so he simply held her body with one hand and led her to clumsily dodge the attacks of the 2 flying swords. If the 2 long swords were slashing horizontally, Li Yundong would use his fingers to flick them away. But if they were slashing vertically, Li Yundong would use the fairy-tied rope to block the slashes of the long swords. The fairy-tied rope had originally been used to bind the two of them, but now it had saved their lives. The Liuha's attacks were fruitless, and it suddenly became angry. One of the long swords retreated a little and then stabbed toward Li Yundong like a spear. Li Yundong felt the hairs on his lower abdomen stand on end. Relying on his amazing foresight, he pulled Zi Yuan's body back an inch. With a cheap sound, the long sword instantly pierced between Li Yundong and Zi Yuan's bodies. The sharp blade cut open their bodies at the same time, and blood flowed out. With this blood, the long sword that had been inserted between Li Yundong and Zi Yuan suddenly struggled violently. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He realized that his blood was the Yuanyang blood of a boy, and Zi Yuan's was the Yuanyin blood of a virgin. How could the Liuha bear the two kinds of blood at the same time? Li Yundong immediately grabbed the long sword between the two of them with one hand, and Xueqi surged out of his whole body. The Liuha suddenly struggled crazily, like a flood dragon overturning the rivers and seas. Li Yundong felt as if he was controlling a mad beast. If it weren't for his amazing divine power, which had allowed him to control the long sword and not let it move, the long sword would have cut the two of them open. Li Yunyan's Xueqi was strong. His Xueqi poured into the Liuha sword for about 10 seconds before it stopped moving. As soon as the Liuha sword in his hand calmed down, the other two long swords suddenly trembled violently one after another, making buzzing sounds. Then, they turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared. Why are these swords gone? Li Yundong was shocked and asked in confusion. Zi Yuan was still a little confused. Li Yundong patted her on the shoulder gently, and she seemed to wake up from a dream. She asked, "What's wrong?" Li Yundong pulled out the Liuha that had been inserted between the two of them and said, "I subdued one sword. Why are the other two gone?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly heard Yan Feng let out an angry roar from outside. "Which despicable person took my Liuha?" Zhang Ling laughed and said, "Yan Feng, your Liuha has been subdued. Let's see how you can still be arrogant." Wan Zhenyuan snorted coldly and said, "Zhenren Yan, you can also take a rest. Just now you fought so many people alone. You must be tired, right?" He raised his hand, and the fly whisk in his hand instantly shot out a fierce gust of wind toward Yan Feng. Yan Feng had lost her magical item, so she didn't dare to take it head-on. She dodged and said sternly, "Li Yundong, did you take my Liuha? I'm not done with you." After that, Yan Feng's figure quickly turned into a ray of blue light and disappeared. As soon as everyone heard Li Yundong's name, they were shocked and looked around. Li Yundong? Li Yundong, the leader of the Fox Zen school? Where is he? Where is he? Li Yundong was shocked and angry. He cursed in a low voice, "Damn it, Yan Feng, that be asterisk starred. Didn't forget to get me involved before she left. F asterisk CKU. 16b. Chapter 377. Go to watch net. Only then did Zi Yuan understand what had happened. She calmed herself down and said quickly, "The Liuha can transform into countless swords, which is most suitable for group battles. But it also has a fatal weakness, that is, once the sword it turns into is subdued by the opponent, all the other swords will disappear, and the sword that has been subdued will become the real body of the Liuha. Go to watch net." Li Yundong suddenly understood and said, "So any sword can be called the Liuha?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes. Now that they have noticed us, we have to leave quickly. Otherwise, once they find us, we will immediately be besieged by them. We will be doomed eternally." Li Yundong waved the long sword in his hand and said with a wry smile, "How can we go? The two of us are still tied up." Without thinking, Zi Yuan said, "You command us to move to the inner room. There is a secret room there. We might be able to find it if we look for it. This is the way out. Otherwise, when they find us here and rush in, we will be the target of public criticism." Li Yundong turned to Su Chan and said, "Chaner, go in and find the secret room. Tell me when you find it." Su Chan responded and turned to leave. However, Li Yundong warned her again, "Be careful when you find the secret room. Be on guard against someone attacking you from inside." Su Chan had seen Li Yundong and Zi Yuan almost sticking their necks to each other. It could be said that they were extremely intimate. She felt a little sour in her heart, But at this time, after hearing Li Yundong's words, she suddenly felt sweet in her heart. Then, like a little bird, she quickly turned around and flashed into the inner room. Zi Yuan said to Li Yundong, "You command, and I will cooperate with you. The fairy-tied rope is getting tighter and tighter. If we move too much, it will continue to tighten." However, Li Yundong pondered for a while and said, "No, I just thought of a way to get rid of this fairy-tied rope." Zi Yuan was shocked and asked with joy, "What is it?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's very simple. Attract the heavenly thunder." Zi Yuan was shocked. "It can't be. What if you hit both of us? How thin is this rope?" To be able to strike the rope with the heavenly lightning without hurting himself, how precise was his control of the lightning? "Your five thunders execution technique isn't proficient enough. Aren't you courting death by attracting the heavenly lightning to strike the immortal binding rope?" Li Yundong said helplessly, "What should we do? If the two of us are tied up like this, those guys will discover us sooner or later. Invisibility is useless, so we might as well give it our all. Besides, if we die, we should all die together. It's not bad to hold a fairy sister in my arms and ascend to immortality together. As the saying goes, dying under a peony flower makes me a romantic ghost. Haha." Zi Yuan blushed slightly and spat in a low voice. "Bah! Who wants to die with you?" Before she could finish her words, Su Chan rushed out of the inner room, hugged Li Yundong and cried, "Sir, I'll die with you. I won't allow you to die with anyone else." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing out loud. "Fool! Don't you know how to say that I won't allow you to die? Why do you make it sound like I'm going to die? Do you have no confidence in me?" As he laughed, his body moved. In addition, Su Chan was hugging him. The immortal binding rope sensed his strength and slowly tightened. Li Yundong's laughter stopped abruptly. He took a deep breath and said, "Let go of me. Stop hugging me. This rope is going to break my ribs." Su Chan let go of him and looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. She said eagerly, "Do you really have a way?" Li Yundong coaxed, "Of course, your master is omnipotent. Of course I have a way. You have to believe in him. Hurry up. Be good and go into the house to find the secret room. I'll be fine later." Su Chan took Li Yundong's hand and said reluctantly, "If you die, then I won't live either. I'll die with you." Li Yundong was moved, but he scolded with a smile, "Bah, bah, bah, you're unlucky. I want to live for 100 years and travel all over the world with you. How can I die so easily? Hurry up. Don't delay. If they rush in later, your master won't be able to live even if he wants to." Only then did Su Chan listen to him. She wiped away her tears and went back into the inner room. Li Yundong shook his head helplessly and said with a smile, "This girl." Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on Su Chan in the inner room. She suddenly sighed faintly and said, "It's really good to have someone in the world who is willing to give everything for you and loves you so much." A gentle smile appeared on Li Yundong's face. "Yes." This kind of emotion only flashed by, and Li Yundong quickly said, "I'm going to use qi to attract the heavenly thunder. You should also use qi to protect your body. Don't be touched by the heavenly thunder. It's not fun." Although Zi Yuan didn't know how Li Yundong was going to attract the heavenly thunder and how he could ensure that the heavenly thunder would not hit him and accurately hit the fairy-tied rope at the same time, she didn't refute Li Yundong's words out of a subconscious trust. Her whole body was covered with the zhenqi of the Xianmen sect, and she looked at Li Yundong uneasily. Li Yundong took a deep breath and mobilized his zhenqi to silently use the 5 thunder righteous method. After a while, white steam rose from the top of his head, mobilizing the qi of chaos between heaven and earth, causing the dark clouds in the sky to roll and become denser and denser. At this time, all the cultivators present also felt that something was wrong. Zhongling even faintly felt that there was a pair of majestic eyes in the sky staring at her back, which made her hair stand on end. Zhongling suddenly raised her head and shouted, "Who is attracting the heavenly thunder? Do you want to die? Aren't you afraid of being struck?" Wang Zhenyuan's expression was cold. He sneered and said, "Which fellow Taoist is so bold as to want to die with us?" After that, he looked at every cultivator present fiercely. As long as he found out who was attracting the heavenly thunder, he would immediately strike. When the cultivators present saw that Zhang Ling and Wang Zhenyuan had suddenly joined hands, they were all shocked and hurriedly tried to explain, It's not me, it's not me. Zhang Ling's eyes were sharp, and her eyes were bursting with light. She swept them back and forth like a sharp knife, as if she was trying to find out who was attracting the heavenly thunder. Zhou Ping, who was next to her, suddenly said loudly, "Master, could it be the thunder dragon? Ahem. Could it be the person who struck us tonight?" Zhang Ling's expression turned serious and she said decisively, "It's very possible." She suddenly turned her head and shouted at Wan Zhenyuan, "Master Wan, did you really not go to Mount Longhu tonight?" Wan Zhenyuan sneered and said, "Nonsense, I haven't taken a step out of the ancestral court all night." Zhang Ling thought, "Damn it, I made a mistake." However, she was stubborn and thin-skinned. She was unwilling to admit her mistake, so she said angrily, "Then why didn't you admit it just now?" Wan Zhenyuan rolled his eyes and said arrogantly, "I'm the head of the Gazao sect. In terms of status, I'm higher than you, Zhang Ling. In terms of seniority, I'm also older than you. In terms of age, I'm also older than you. You questioned me as soon as you came up. If I admit defeat and this matter is spread out, how can I, Wan Zhenyuan, put my face in the future?" Zhang Ling snorted and thought to herself, "Last time, you were killed and had to flee from the ancestral court. Even the Renyuan Jindan was taken away. Now that such a shameful thing has been spread out, what else can't you lose?" However, she was still afraid of Wan Zhenyuan, so she didn't say it out loud. She searched for a while and didn't find anyone attracting the heavenly thunder. However, the dark clouds in the sky were getting thicker and thicker. Zhang Ling snorted and landed from the sky, lest the heavenly thunder hit the highest cultivator first. However, after she landed, she was furious when she thought about what had happened that night. First, her side hall had been struck, and the magic formation she had wanted to refine the sword spirit had been destroyed, causing the perfect Sanju formation to fail. Then, she had finally caught up with the enemy, but she had found the wrong target. She had been confused and fought with someone on the field. Now, she had been forced to land on the ground by the heavenly thunder and didn't even dare to fly. Zhang Ling thought to herself, "I've been cultivating since I was in my mother's womb. When have I ever been bullied like this?" The more Zhang Ling thought about it, the angrier she became, and the anger on her face became more and more obvious. Zhou Ping, who was beside her, observed her expression and said, "Master, do you think it's Li Yundong's doing?" Zhang Ling was stunned. "Li Yundong?" She thought for a while and asked doubtfully, "Does he know how to attract the heavenly thunder?" Zhou Ping snorted and said, "With Zi Yuan, that little b****, helping him what's impossible?" Zhang Ling suddenly flew into a rage. "Zi Yuan is a b****. When I catch her, I'll put her in prison for 100 years. Zhou Ping was overjoyed when she heard this. She fanned the flames and said, "Master, let's catch Li Yundong first. If we catch him, Zi Yuan will have no one to rely on." Zhang Ling said decisively, "We can't let either of them go." While she was speaking, a loud noise suddenly came from the sky. The night sky, which had been thousands of miles long, was now covered with thick dark clouds. Thunder and lightning were intertwined in the clouds, and the power of heaven was outstanding. The cultivators present all looked up at the sky with frightened expressions. They all wanted to dodge subconsciously, but at this time, most of the people present were cultivators with status. They were all afraid that if they escaped, they would become the laughing stock of the cultivation world in the future. They wouldn't even be able to lift their heads. Thinking of this, although the cultivators present were afraid, they could only straighten their necks and look at the sky eagerly, praying in their hearts that the heavenly thunder would not come straight for them. However, Dang Chong of the Penglai sect did not have such concerns. Seeing that the heavenly thunder was about to fall from the sky, he let out a dry howl, turned his head, and jumped out of the red wall. He shouted, "Run! Are you going to stand there and wait for the heavenly thunder to strike?" As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud bang. A bolt of heavenly thunder instantly cut through the sky, and suddenly fell straight toward the side hall of the Gazao sect. Li Yundong, who was attracting the thunder in the side hall, suddenly threw the Lyoha in his hand at the moment the heavenly thunder was about to fall. The Lyoha sword flipped and rolled in the air. The snow-white blade illuminated Li Yundong's forehead, which was covered with fine sweat. At the same time, it also reflected the nervous expression in Zi Yuan's eyes. Boom! The heavenly thunder suddenly fell toward the side hall, fiercely pouncing toward Li Yundong and Zi Yuan. However, in mid-air, the hilt of the Lyoha sword hit the heavenly thunder. The long sword guided the surging heavenly thunder from the hilt to the tip of the sword. The tip of the Lyoha sword just happened to flip and fall on the fairy-tied rope. It was only half a centimeter away from the skin of the two of them. No matter which way it went, the two of them would be struck by the heavenly thunder. The fairy-tied rope was struck by the heavenly thunder and immediately fell to the ground. The Lyoha sword was struck by the heavenly thunder and suddenly rotated violently. It turned into a flywheel and cut toward the statue of Emperor Guan in the shrine of the side hall. With a crack, the statue's head was instantly cut off. Before Li Yundong and Zi Yuan could react, they saw the head of Emperor Guan fall to the ground and roll a few times on the ground. Then, a golden round pill rolled out of it. In an instant, the fragrance of the pill filled the side hall. The pill shone with golden light. The light passed through the hole in the side hall that had been struck by the heavenly thunder and rushed straight into the sky, condensing and not dissipating. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan exclaimed at the same time, "Renyuan Jin Dan." At the same time, all the cultivators outside the side hall exclaimed, "The Jin Dan has appeared." At this moment, everyone's breathing became heavy. No cultivator could remain calm in the face of Renyuan Jin Dan. Even a great cultivator like Zhang Ling's pupils shrank in an instant, and a strong look of greed appeared on her face. "Grab it!" Although no cultivator blurted out this word, the same word popped up in everyone's mind at the same time. They rushed toward the side hall at the same time as if they had gone crazy. 16b. Chapter 378. Go to watch net. Just as Renyuan Jin Dan rolled out of the head of the statue of Emperor Guan, Su Chan shouted loudly in the inner room, "I found the entrance." When Li Yundong heard this, he saw the Renyuan Jin Dan rolling on the ground and immediately jumped up. At the same time he shouted, "Zi Yuan, take the Lyoha and I'll take the Jin Dan. Let's go." At the same time as Li Yunyong shouted, Zi Yuan rushed to the statue of the headless Emperor Guan like lightning. She pulled out the Lyoha sword and then quickly rushed into the inner room. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong's figure moved. He didn't even have time to pick up the fairy-tied rope. He rushed to the Renyuan Jin Dan and scooped it into his palm. Then, with a spin of his feet, he rushed into the inner room. As soon as Li Yundong entered the inner room, he saw Su Chan standing in front of a wall in the inner room. She pushed aside a statue and pointed to a narrow door that was as tall as a person and wide as a person. "Here, it's just a secret passage." Li Yundong didn't even think about it and said decisively, "Zi Yuan, you lead the way. Su Chan, you walk in the middle, and I'll cover you." After that, he threw Jin Dan to Zi Yuan and said, "If something happens later, you go first." Zi Yuan turned around and rushed into the secret passage. Then, without hesitation, she threw the Jin Dan to Su Chan. "Su Chan, you're the best at running away. If the pursuers are too close, take the Renyuan Jin Dan and run first." At this time, the Lyoha had not recognized its master, so it was no different from an ordinary long sword. Li Yundong had never learned swordsmanship, so holding the long sword would be a burden, and it would be easy for others to recognize her. So she simply took the long sword with her and took it with her. Su Chan hadn't expected that the Renyuan Jin Dan would fall into her hands again. She was shocked and shouted, "Me? I want to go with Yundong." Li Yundong picked her up and threw her into the secret passage. "Don't talk nonsense. Let's go." Zi Yuan caught Su Chan and quickly ran into the secret passage with her. As soon as he threw Su Chan into the secret passage, someone broke into the side hall with a loud bang. He turned his head and went into the secret passage. He quickly tore off his clothes and covered his face. Zhang Ling's cultivation was the highest and her speed was also the fastest. She chased into the main hall, looked left and right, and immediately chased into the inner room. As soon as she entered the inner room, she saw a dark hole on the wall, and the statue of old Lord Taishang fell to the side. Zhang Ling saw that the hole could only allow one person to enter at a time. If there was someone guarding the hole, it would really be difficult for one person to pass through. Especially since it was pitch black inside, if someone were to ambush them, it would be very bad. The other cultivators also rushed to the inner room of the side hall. When they saw the dark entrance to the secret tunnel, they hesitated for a moment and stopped. No one dared to chase in. However, Zhang Lingyi was bold. Relying on her high cultivation level, she stomped her feet, clenched her teeth, and rushed in. Li Yundong had already expected that the other party would chase after him. Without saying a word, he slammed his palm toward the person. Zhang Ling shouted angrily, "Come on!" Her palm met Li Yundong's palm. With a muffled bang, Li Yundong and Zhang Ling both took a step back at the same time, both of them shocked. Because the secret passage was dark, Li Yundong didn't know who it was. Moreover, he didn't know whether the secret passage he had found in a hurry was a way out. If it was a dead end, he could only guard the entrance and not let anyone in. Otherwise, it would not be one man guarding the pass, but a turtle in a jar. Li Yundong guarded the entrance of the cave, trying to buy some time for Zi Yuan and Su Chan to escape. He wanted to rely on the geographical advantage to defend for a while, but he didn't expect that the person would be so fierce, and his zhenqi was not inferior to his at all. Ever since Li Yundong entered the cultivation world, he had fought with cultivators from various sects and was undefeated. He had relied on his Jindan zhenqi and Niden, which was as condensed as steel. However, Zhang Ling had cultivated for decades and cultivated the orthodox Taoist magic. Her Niden was condensed and her zhenqi was vigorous. She was only above Li Yundong, not below him. In particular, Zhang Ling knew a lot of magic. Compared with Li Yundong, they were like heaven and earth. They were not on the same level at all. Li Yundong suddenly realized that the person in front of him was the strongest enemy he had ever met in his life. He was much stronger than anyone he had ever fought against. He knew that if he retreated because he was no match for this person, Zi Yuan and Su Chan would find out that this secret passage was a dead end. Then they would definitely die. There was no way for them to survive. It didn't matter if he died, but Su Chan and Zi Yuan couldn't die. He could only advance, not retreat. Li Yundong made up his mind and suddenly took a deep breath. The fighting spirit in his body were burning to the extreme. His eyes were bright, shining with divine light, and he was full of fighting spirit. Zhang Ling, who had been forced to take a step back by Li Yundong, was also shocked. She had roughly guessed that the person inside was Li Yundong, but she had never expected that Li Yundong's zhenqi would be so vigorous, as if it was not inferior to hers. Especially after this person's palm attack, 2 rays of divine light shot out of his eyes, as if they were real. The momentum and zhenqi of his whole body seemed to be much more vigorous and majestic than before. Zhang Ling took a deep breath and thought to herself, "There is such a powerful master among the younger generation of the cultivation world? I'm afraid Zi Yuan is not as good as him. The most amazing thing is that this kid is so young. How can his zhenqi be so vigorous? I've only seen such a cultivation at such a young age in my younger brother Zhang Tianshi. Where on earth did this guy come from?" Zhang Ling wanted to test how vigorous Li Yundong's zhenqi was, and she also wanted to test where his bottom line was. She immediately took a deep breath and slapped Li Yundong with both palms. Without any fancy skills, she purely relied on her vigorous zhenqi to make a head-on blow. If Li Yundong was afraid, he could only retreat. If he didn't retreat, he could only take the attack. There was no way to dodge. Li Yundong saw the other party's 2 palms coming at him. Although the palms were not big, Li Yundong felt a strong and majestic aura coming at him. It was like a huge wave that could topple mountains and overturn seas, making him almost breathless. Although he had suddenly encountered a strong enemy, Li Yundong was not afraid at all. The zhenqi all over his body exploded like explosives, and the heavenly Jindan technique in his body was running rapidly. A crackling sound came from his bones, and he slapped Zhang Ling with both palms. With a loud bang, Li Yundong and Zhang Ling both took 3 steps back at the same time. The secret passage was shaken by the wind of their palms, and a lot of dust suddenly fell. The people in the side hall outside the secret passage also felt the ground shake a little. When Zhang Ling saw that Li Yundong's palm had not been at a disadvantage at all, she was suddenly shocked and angry. She had always been proud and arrogant. Among the cultivators in the world, except for her brother, the leader, she didn't respect anyone. But suddenly, in front of so many cultivators, she had been forced out by 2 consecutive palms. She felt ashamed and angry. She mobilized all the zhenqi in her body to the peak. With a loud shout, she pushed her palms and slapped them again. This time, Zhang Ling used all the zhenqi in her body. Li Yundong only felt that there was a high-speed train running in front of him. As long as he hit it, he would be smashed to pieces in an instant. Li Yundong knew that life and death were at this moment. The heavenly Jindan technique in his body suddenly ran to the 8th turn. The qi in his body was boiling, and the yin and yang qi between his two kidneys instantly intertwined. A stream of black qi and a stream of red qi suddenly sprayed out of his nostrils. One of his palms turned fiery red, and the other became as black iron. The yin and yang Jindan qi rushed toward Zhang Ling like a beast tide. Zhang Ling was so anxious and angry that she didn't use her magic. Instead, she chose to compete with Li Yundong with the purest internal force and zhenqi. This time, all of Li Yundong's potential was forced out. The long-lost heavenly Jindan technique's 8 turns of the fire-nurturing realm was not a joke. Bang! The palms of the two men collided, and they were immediately sent flying backwards like cannonballs. Zhang Ling couldn't stop the momentum, and with a bang, she knocked down countless statues of the shrines behind her. Zhou Ping, who was beside her, was shocked and rushed to her side to support her. Only then did she stop the momentum and not continue to embarrass herself. The cultivators who couldn't get involved saw Zhang Ling and the mysterious man in the secret passage fight 3 times in a row, and as a result, she was repelled 3 times in a row. The last time, she was even blown away. They all burst into an uproar, and their faces showed strong shock and fear. Zhang Ling's cultivation was so high that she was absolutely famous in the cultivation world. Especially the magic cultivation she had shown in the chaotic battle just now. It made every cultivator present feel that she deserved her reputation. But Zhang Ling, with her cultivation, had been forcibly hit and sent flying. What would they do if it were them? For a moment, they looked at each other. Although they were salivating for Renyuan Jindan, this narrow and dark hole frightened them so much that they stopped moving forward. No one dared to take another step forward. "Master, are you okay?" After supporting Zhang Ling, Zhou Ping asked nervously and in horror. Zhang Ling stopped in her tracks angrily. She suddenly pushed Zhou Ping away and said angrily, "Get out of my way." After that, she slapped the ground with her palm, and with a loud bang, countless cracks appeared on the ground. Then, she grabbed the air with both hands and grabbed a large amount of fire and magma. She rubbed her hands together and clapped them again. A fierce and blazing fire dragon in her hand went straight to the secret passage. Everyone saw the fire dragon twisting and pouncing into the secret room, instantly illuminating the figure of a person. This person quickly pinched his fingers together, and his 2 hands were bound. His middle fingers were stretched out vertically like needles. It was the Samayama Mahamudra of the Vajra realm in the mantra Mahamudra. The man roared bang. The mantra was like thunder, shaking the ears of all the cultivators present with a buzzing sound, and their eardrums were in pain. The Mahamudra fiercely slapped out in the air, smashing the fire dragon into pieces. The flames fell on the wall of the secret passage and could not be extinguished for a moment, illuminating the figure of the man. Everyone fixed their eyes on him and saw that half of his body was hidden in the darkness, mysterious and majestic. The other half of his body was illuminated by the flames. His face was covered, and his eyes were shining brightly. His figure stood like a mountain, like a deep abyss or a high mountain. He was really majestic and could hold the fort by himself. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was guarding the entrance of the secret passage alone. Although there were many of them, they couldn't do anything to him. Even Zhang Ling, who had the highest cultivation, had been sent flying by him with 3 palms. They suddenly looked at each other. Although they wanted to snatch the treasure, they didn't have the courage to go forward. It was not the first time that Ding Nan, who was hiding at the back of the crowd, had seen Li Yundong fight back alone. But at this time, when she saw the scene in front of her, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. What is an invincible hero? This is it. Kids. You are too ruthless. You are the 6th one, forcing me to update 5 times. This Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, these 5 days, the update time is the same as before. Chapter 379. Go to Watch Network. The fire of the 9 earthly realms controlled by the Lady of the Earthly Fire was extremely fierce. As long as it was touched, it would immediately ignite into a raging fire. Except for a few magical items, there was nothing in the world that could withstand the burning of the fire of the 9 earthly realms. Go to 7K. Oath M. However, Li Yundong's Mahamudra was invisible and vigorous zhenqi, which could not be burned at all. It just happened to restrain Zhongling's fire of the 9 earthly realms. Moreover, Li Yundong's location was excellent, so it could be said that he had the geographical advantage. Zhongling saw that Li Yundong had easily dispersed the fire of the 9 earthly realms, which she was most proud of. The surrounding cultivators looked at Li Yundong with more awe. She was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood. Seeing that her master had suffered a loss, Zhou Ping immediately shouted, "Li Yundong, are you tired of living? How dare you offend our Zhengyi school?" Most of the people outside the secret passage were cultivators who had participated in the siege of the Fox Zen school. At this time, they all recognized that this person was Li Yundong, especially his mantra Mahamudra, which had left a deep impression on them. They saw that Li Yundong was guarding the entrance of the cave, making it impossible for them to move forward. If they forced their way in, they were afraid that they would not end up well. The fact that Li Yundong had killed 2 people and defeated 7 people in a row in the Fox Zen school last time was still vivid in their minds, and they still had lingering fears. They said one after another, "Zhenren Li, let's talk about it. Did you take the Renyuan Jindan? How about we buy your Jindan? Name a price." "Yeah, say something, it doesn't have to be fighting and killing. Zhenren Li, there are many powerful magical weapons in our Jinshan sect. Whichever one you like, just tell us. We'll exchange it for this Renyuan Jindan." The cultivation world had always believed in the law of the jungle. The weak were prey to the strong, and the fittest survived. Zhang Ling had tried to be tough before, but Li Yundong was even tougher than her. At this time, they were helpless, so they could only be humble and soft. Li Yundong saw that the flames on the wall of the secret passage were still burning, illuminating his figure clearly. He waved his sleeve, and a fierce and overbearing gust of wind suddenly waved out, immediately extinguishing the flames, and his figure fell into darkness again. When the crowd saw Li Yundong's figure disappear into the darkness in an instant and he didn't answer them, they immediately became anxious and hurriedly said, "Zhenren Li, say something. We can discuss something." At this time, Zhang Ling also slowly calmed down. She remembered that the moment she had fought with Li Yundong just now, she had seen a stream of red qi and black qi coming out of his nostrils. His appearance was strange and his cultivation method was powerful. She was shocked and shouted, "Li Yundong, did you get the heavenly Jindan technique? I didn't expect you to have actually cultivated to the 8th transformation of fire-nurturing realm at such a young age." Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, "Paper really can't wrap fire. She actually recognized me." Li Yundong made up his mind not to speak. He remained silent, neither admitting nor denying it. But as soon as Zhang Ling said that, the other cultivators immediately exploded. Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon Sect said in surprise, "Zhenren Li, I've long heard that you've obtained the long-lost heavenly Jindan technique. I originally thought it was a rumor, but I didn't expect it to be true. Our Chuanjian Dragon Sect has a good relationship with Mr. Chen Pu. Where did you get the heavenly Jindan technique? Can I borrow it to have a look?" As soon as Du Fei said this, the cultivators of the other sects were unhappy. Zhang Hongqing of the Jinshan sect said loudly, "Zhenren Du, your words are inappropriate. What do you mean that your Chuanjian Dragon sect has a good relationship with Mr. Chen Pu? Are you shameless? Mr. Chen Pu is from the last 5 generations of the Tang dynasty. Your Chuanjian Dragon sect was founded at the end of the Song dynasty and the Yuan dynasty. There have been more than 300 years between them. Aren't you too shameless to claim a relationship with him?" Du Fei's face darkened. He turned his head and said, "Our Chuanjian Dragon sect is an orthodox Taoist sect. The heavenly Jindan technique that Mr. Chen Pu created is also an orthodox Taoist kung fu. Wang Chongyang, the founder of the Chuanjian sect, combined Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism into one. He learned from all kinds of sects, including Mr. Chen Pu's Gall training technique. According to the cultivation method, we belong to the same lineage, so how can there be no relationship?" Du Fei's words made the other cultivators burst into laughter. Chen Anji of the Eastern Chinese sect said sarcastically, "If that's the case, then our Grandmaster Ning Chuanjian and Mr. Chen Pu are even closer." Immediately, a cultivator said, "Nonsense, Ning Chuanjian is also a cultivator of the Song dynasty. How can they be closer?" Chen Anji said sarcastically, "According to Zhenren Du, the kung fu created by Ning Chuanjian of our Donghua sect is also an orthodox Taoist kung fu. Moreover, Our Grandmaster Ning Chuanjun is from the Northern Song dynasty and lived much earlier than Wang Chongyang. According to the time, isn't he closer to Mr. Chen Pu? Everyone burst into laughter, taking pleasure in his misfortune. Zhang Yuan, who was standing at the back, said in a low voice with a face full of sarcasm and disdain, "This group of good-for-nothings. When they encounter something, they only know how to undermine each other. Alliance of the Six Sects, bah! What the hell? What's the use of asking about the heavenly Jindan technique instead of chasing after the Renyuan Jindan in front of him? Will he spit out what he has eaten? Stupid, stupid beyond belief." Ding Nan also asked in a low voice, "Master, what is the heavenly Jindan technique?" Zhang Yuan glanced at her and said kindly, "I'll tell you when we get back." As he spoke, his expression suddenly became very unwilling and resentful. However, Li Yundong has obtained the Renyuan Jindan and the heavenly Jindan technique. I'm afraid that our chances of revenge have become very slim. Alas, I originally wanted to fish in troubled waters tonight and see what benefits I could take, but I didn't expect that Li Yundong would take advantage of it. Damn it, damn it. While he was whispering to Ding Nan, the cultivators of the various sects were already quarreling. Zhang Ling was irritated when she heard this. She shouted, "What are you arguing about? Can you get a result by arguing like this? How can you make the other party willingly return the rare treasures to you just by talking? What kind of sweet dreams are you having?" Zhang Ling was of high seniority and strength, so her words were extremely prestigious. The cultivators of the various cultivation sects seemed to wake up from a dream and once again united against the common enemy. They said one after another, "Li Yundong, hurry up and hand over the heavenly Jindan technique. This is the most precious treasure of our Taoism. All the cultivation sects in our cultivation world have a share. How can you keep it all to yourself?" "That's right. Do you think you can defeat so many of us by yourself? Can a small fox Zen school withstand the joint attack of so many sects? Nonsense. If Li Yundong could bow his head and admit defeat, he would not have stood out in Mount Tianlong. Does this kind of person look like someone who can be threatened? Then what do you think we should do? He's guarding here, and we can't rush in. Can we just guard here? Why not? With so many of us guarding here, we can exhaust him to death. Hey, no, what if there is an exit in this secret passage? Oh damn it. If there is an exit, what should we do? Hey, Li Yundong hasn't spoken for a long time. Could he have already run away? It's possible. Who among you can go in and have a look? F***CK. Why don't you go in and have a look? The cultivators of the various cultivation sects made excuses. They all wanted each other to go in and be cannon fodder, but no one was willing to take the initiative to go forward. Even Zhang Ling was nervous. She thought to herself, "I didn't get any benefits when I went up just now. I don't know if I can get any benefits if I go up now. How many magic did that little B***TCH teach this guy? How many more abilities does this guy have that he hasn't shown? It's not a big deal if I can't beat him, but it's a big deal if I lose face for myself and the sect." At this time, a cultivator suddenly shouted, "By the way, where is Master Wan Zhenyun? Hurry up and ask him if there is an exit in this secret passage and where it leads to." At this time, the cultivators in the room of the side hall remembered that they were on the ground of the Gazao sect. They quickly looked around and found that Wan Zhenyun, the master of the Gazao sect, was not there. F***CK. Where is Wan Zhenyun? Did he run away like last time? Didn't he just say that he would keep all of us here? He was so fierce. Why is he nowhere to be seen now? Nonsense, who doesn't know how to say fierce words? With so many sects coming to snatch the Renyuan Jindan, how can he stop them? If he doesn't run, will he stay and humiliate himself? Bah, this Wan Zhenyun is too much. He doesn't even want his own ancestral court. Just now he was so confident. Zhou Ping saw that they were quarreling, so she said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, stop quarreling. If we quarrel for one more second, Li Yundong will escape a little further. Since no one is willing to go in and find out what is going on, why don't we release our powerful magical weapons and let them go in together? I believe that no matter how powerful Li Yundong is, he won't be able to withstand the attack of so many powerful magical weapons. Once he fights back, we will know that he is not inside. If he doesn't fight back, he will definitely die, And we can also snatch the Renyuan Jindan back. When the crowd heard this, some cultivators immediately slapped their thighs and said loudly, "That's right. Why didn't I think of such a simple way? Zhenren Zhou deserves to be the disciple of the Lady of the Earthly Fire. Good idea, let's do as you say." Zhang Yuan of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua looked at Zhou Ping with a sneer. He said to Ding Nan in a low voice, "Good disciple, you have to remember this woman. She is ruthless and quick-witted. If she becomes a great person in the future, she will definitely be your strong enemy." At this time, the cultivators of the various sects released their powerful magical weapons one after another, and then attacked the secret passage like a storm. Everyone heard a clanging sound in the secret passage. Their powerful magical weapons seemed to have hit a steel wall and could not move an inch. They immediately shouted, "This guy is still inside. Everyone, come on." After confirming that Li Yundong was still inside, the cultivators of the various sects became energetic and drove their powerful magical weapons to attack frantically. But no matter how hard they attacked, there was still a clanging sound coming from inside. After a long time, they couldn't help but feel suspicious. What's going on? Why do I feel that something is wrong? Zhang Ling was also confused. She shouted, "Let me do it." After that, she clapped her hands and released a fierce fire dragon, which rushed into the secret passage. Wherever the fire dragon went, it immediately lit up the surroundings. Everyone saw an iron wall covered with golden Sanskrit in the secret passage. It was the fan leaf of the Fan of Seven Treasures. The Fan of Seven Treasures sensed that the fire dragon was coming straight for it, but it did not dare to intercept it. It immediately retracted its fan leaf and fled into the secret passage in the blink of an eye. Everyone was shocked and cried out in unison, "Oh no, we've fallen into the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Li Yundong has run away." Zhang Ling shouted angrily and took the lead to chase into the secret passage. With someone taking the lead, the others also became bold and rushed in. Along the way, Zhang Ling was extremely vigilant as she sprinted forward. The fire dragon that she had released led the way. After she sprinted for a while, the fire dragon suddenly rushed out of a cave with a loud bang. With a whoosh, the branches and leaves that were covering the entrance of the cave were set ablaze, and the fire spread in all directions. Zhang Ling rushed out of the cave. She looked around and realized that she was already at the foot of the mountain. She snorted angrily and waved her hands. The flames that were spreading around immediately flew towards her palms. Zhang Ling rubbed her palms together, and the flames immediately turned into a puff of green smoke and disappeared without a trace. At this time, the cultivators of the other sects rushed out of the secret passage one after another. They all stamped their feet and said angrily, "Damn it, he got away." Zhou Ping also said angrily, "The monk can run away, but the temple can't. I know where his lair is. Everyone, follow me." Chapter 380. Go to watch net. As soon as the crowd heard Zhou Ping's words, they immediately shouted, "Okay, let's go find trouble with him. Let's see where he can run to." At this time, everyone felt like they had been played. They were furious and excited. They quickly flew away from Mount Gazao with Zhou Ping and flew aggressively toward Tiannan City. Go to watch net. But after flying to Tiannan City, Zhang Ling suddenly shouted, "Wait." At this time, Yan Feng had already escaped, and Wan Zhenyuan was no longer there. Zhang Ling had become the leader of this group of cultivators. As soon as she spoke, everyone immediately stopped in mid-air. They asked in confusion, "Zhenren Zhang, what's wrong?" Zhang Ling turned to Zhou Ping with a cold expression and said, "Does Li Yundong live in such a busy city?" Zhou Ping nodded subconsciously. "Yes, he lives in a very high-end community, and he has also opened a shop on the busiest pedestrian street in Tiannan City." Zhang Ling sneered and said, "Humph, there are so many of us cultivators. What should we do if we go to him? Are you going to fight and kill everyone?" Her words made the cultivators of the other sects tremble and fall silent. They knew that there was an iron law in the cultivation world that could not be violated. That was, no magic or magical items could be used to kill secular mortals. Compared with this iron law, there was another unwritten rule in the cultivation world. That was, no magic that could be detected by secular mortals in front of them. Over the years, thanks to the reform and opening up, the cultivation world had gradually regained its vitality. However, almost every senior cultivator still had lingering fears about the terrible 10 years of turmoil. All the Taoist temples in Mount Longhu had been smashed by the Red Guards, and the ancestral grave of Wang Chongyang, the founder of the Chuanjin sect, had been dug up by the Red Guards. His bones had been thrown into the wilderness. If it hadn't been for Zhao Maozhong, a villager of Zuan village, who had kindly picked up Wang Chongyang's bones, Wang Chongyang's coffin in Chongyang Palace would have still been an empty grave. That storm had almost dealt a fatal blow to the cultivation world, and it had almost been beyond redemption. As a result, the older generation of cultivators, who had finally recovered, learned a lesson. Under the current government control, cultivators must keep a low profile. They must never use magic in front of secular mortals, lest they attract the attention of the country and bring a terrible disaster to the cultivation world again. Therefore, the older generation of cultivators had repeatedly told their disciples and granddisciples about this unwritten rule. At present, these cultivators were all inner disciples, and most of them were cultivating in the mountains. They had chased Li Yundong to Tiannan City one by one, only to find that Li Yundong was living with secular mortals. His neighbors were all ordinary people. If they made a move, with Li Yundong's strength and the power of the Fox Zen school, it would definitely not be good. It would be a big event like Mars colliding with Earth. Previously, on Mount Tianlong, the place was sparsely populated, and the outer disciples of various sects had sealed the mountain. Therefore, the fight on the top of the mountain was extremely lively, and did not attract the attention of secular mortals. However, if they were to start a fight in the middle of the city, it would be a huge joke, and the consequences were definitely not something they could bear. Then what should we do? Immediately, a cultivator asked, "Should we just give up and go back with our tails between our legs?" Zhang Ling snorted coldly. Cultivators' affairs should be settled in the cultivation world. Isn't he going to open a shop? Are you afraid that we won't be able to find him? The Taoist assembly will be held in a while. Send him an invitation and see if he wants to go. If he doesn't go, all the cultivation sects in the world will look down on him. There's no need for us to do anything. The other sects will scramble to find trouble with him. If he goes, humph, we will deal with him fair and square. The cultivators of the various sects were overjoyed and said one after another, "Zhenrenzhong, that's a good idea. Let's do it this way." Someone also said doubtfully, "But there's still a long time to go before the Taoist assembly. Are we going to let Li Yundong take the Renyuan Jindan away just like that?" Zhang Ling glanced at him sideways. "Do you think he will leave the Renyuan Jindan for you to snatch? If you want to go, go by yourself. If you cause any trouble, don't get our Zhengi school involved." The cultivator who had spoken before suddenly shrank his neck, his face full of anger. Zhang Yuan had been following them at a distance, flying with his disciple, Ding Nan. He didn't want to stay with this group of people, but he didn't want to leave either. At this time, when he heard what the people present were saying, he turned to Ding Nan and said, "Let's go. We can't do it tonight. Humph, so many people have been taken advantage of by a little boy. What a shame." After that, he took Ding Nan and flew back to Mount Wuhua without saying goodbye to the crowd. As soon as Zhang Yuan landed on the ground with Ding Nan, he sneered and said, "The 6 great sects, humph, a group of good-for-nothing boys. I really don't know what their leader is thinking." After that, he turned to look at Ding Nan and suddenly said, "By the way, didn't you say last time that your physical body was Li Yundong's classmate? Why don't you go?" Ding Nan suddenly became agitated and shouted, "I won't go. If you want to go, go by yourself." Ding Nan was afraid that she would lose face in front of Li Yundong and that he would look down on her. How could she be willing to face him before her cultivation was complete, let alone beg him in a humble voice? Seeing Ding Nan's fierce reaction, Zhang Yuan thought that his disciple, LV Fengping, had remembered the previous destruction of her physical body. He had no choice but to say helplessly, "I haven't said anything yet. Why are you so agitated?" Ding Nan said loudly, "Nothing. I don't want to talk to him." Zhang Yuan could only coax her. "Okay. Alas, then I have to think of another way." However, Li Yundong's cultivation is already high. Now that he has a Renyuan Jindan, I'm afraid that I won't be able to do anything to him in the future. After taking a few deep breaths, Ding Nan gradually calmed down and said, "Don't worry about that. As far as I know, Li Yundong will most likely not take this Renyuan Jindan himself. Instead, he will give it to Su Chan or Zhou Qin. When Zhang Yuan heard this, he immediately asked curiously, why? He doesn't take the Renyuan Jindan himself, but instead gives it to others. Isn't he a fool? But soon, Zhang Yuan suddenly understood and said, I understand. Could it be that he wants to raise these two women as cauldrons and then harvest their yin to nourish his yang? Yes, that must be it. Humph, this guy is so lucky. Hearing this, Ding Nen sneered in her heart. Li Yundong is a rare gentleman in this world. Do you think he is like you? You are a despicable person, so you think of everyone in the world as despicable people. While the cultivators of various sects were chasing Li Yundong to Tianan City, in the Gazao sect on Mount Gazao, Wang Jinyuan stood alone with his hands behind his back in the courtyard where the battle had taken place. He looked up at the dark clouds dissipating in the starry night sky, silent like a statue. Not long after, a tall and burly man slowly walked over from behind him. He was holding the Chenkuan jasper pole in one hand and the fairy-tied rope in the other. His voice was surprisingly old and hoarse. The Renyuan Jindan has been taken away? Heh, this Master Wuhua's destiny connection does have some skill. Wang Jinyuan didn't look back. He said coldly, you'd better make sure that your wishful thinking is not wrong. Otherwise, humph. The man chuckled. 4 decades, I've been meticulous in my calculations. What in the world can escape from my calculations? Wang Jinyuan's face was full of sarcasm. Oh. If you really want Li Yundong to take the Renyuan Jindan, why did you tie him up so tightly with the fairy-tied rope? Aren't you afraid that he won't be able to break free and end up making a fool of himself? The man snorted and said, ever since he took Choner's Renyuan Jindan, I've been observing him for a long time. How can the person I choose be easy to deal with? If he can't escape, it means that he is not the person I want to choose. At worst, I can choose another one. Wang Jinyuan suddenly turned his head and said angrily, be ****. Do you think the Renyuan Jindan I refined is the Lu Wei Di Huang pill? You think it's a waste? The man said bluntly, don't talk nonsense. I helped you collect the spiritual herbs needed for your Renyuan Jindan. If I hadn't helped you get these 2 big golden snakes, you would never have been able to refine the Dun Jindan in your life. There was a flash of anger in Wang Jinyuan's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it and said in a deep voice, now the Dun Jindan is still missing the most important guiding drug. As long as I have this guiding drug, I can refine the Dun Jindan. The man thought for a moment and said, once the Dun Jindan is refined, our plan will be more than half successful. At that time, the Gazao sect of external alchemy will not be far from rising again. Wang Jinyuan's eyes couldn't help but show a strong burning light. He thought for a while and suddenly said, where's your woman? The man said lightly, she's asleep. Wang Jinyuan snorted coldly and said, those who achieve great things don't care about trifles. I think you'd better get rid of her as soon as possible. Aren't you afraid that she'll leak our affairs if you always bring an ordinary person with you? The man snorted and said, I can betray everyone in the world, but I can't betray her. If you say that again, I'll kill you first. Wang Jinyuan's expression changed, but he soon returned to normal. He laughed and said, I didn't expect that an old fox like you would fall in love with someone. It's funny. It's really funny. The man said coldly, you don't have to worry about my business. Just do your job well. The Taoist assembly will be held soon. You'd better make sure that nothing goes wrong. Otherwise, don't expect the Gazao sect to rise again in this lifetime. Wang Jinyuan also sneered and said, don't always threaten me with this. You want to cooperate with me because you want your Fox Zen school to rise again, don't you? If we work together, we'll both benefit. If we fight, we'll both lose. So don't talk about this. The man was silent for a while then said, in short, you should get the last herb as soon as possible. Otherwise, everything will be empty talk. I'll arrange other things. After that, he turned and walked into the side hall. Wang Jinyuan snorted and continued to raise his head. He looked at the vast starry sky, but there was a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth. He murmured slowly, the cultivation world will not be peaceful anymore. Chapter 381. Go to watch net. While Zhang Ling and the others were aggressively rushing to Tianan City, Zi Yuan and Su Chan were on the roof of a building next to their residence, looking around vigilantly and nervously. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. They didn't dare to go home directly. Although they knew that the other party would definitely be able to find them nearby, if the other party was really stubborn and followed them directly into the house, it would be a bloodbath. Su Chan anxiously looked around on the roof, searching for Li Yundong's figure. As the little girl looked around, she said anxiously to Zi Yuan, Sister Zi Yuan, Yundong will come back, right? Zi Yuan was also under a lot of pressure. She knew that tonight, they had completely offended several major Taoist cultivation sects in the world. As the saying goes, an ordinary man is not guilty, but he gets into trouble because of his wealth. Li Yundong had stolen the Renyuan Jindan and let them find his tracks. It was simply unimaginable. Although Zi Yuan secretly criticized Li Yundong in her heart as to why he had to snatch the Renyuan Jindan, with his strength, it wouldn't take long for him to become an extremely powerful great cultivator. Why would he risk the world's condemnation by snatching the Renyuan Jindan? Li Yundong thought to himself. At that time, the situation was urgent, so Zi Yuan did not refute Li Yundong's opinion and followed his advice. But now, Zi Yuan was also not sure what to do and couldn't wait to discuss it with Li Yundong. However, the two of them waited for Li Yundong to return. Even though Zi Yuan was usually calm and composed, she couldn't help but panic at this time. But Su Chan was even more panicked than her. She could only pretend to be calm and comforted Su Chan, saying, Don't worry, Li Yundong is quick-witted and very strong in fighting. He will definitely escape. Su Chan anxiously paced around in place. Then why hasn't he come back yet? I'm so anxious. How about I go find him? As she spoke, the little girl was about to fly up and look for Li Yundong's whereabouts. Zi Yuan quickly stopped her and advised, Don't worry. Maybe Li Yundong is afraid that they will find their way home, so he is leading them in circles. Besides, where are you going to find him? Su Chan was so anxious that she was about to cry. She said, but I'm just worried. Zi Yuan saw that Su Chan was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She couldn't even persuade her. She couldn't help but become more and more anxious. She thought to herself, could it be that something really happened to Li Yundong? Su Chan waited patiently for a while. She gritted her teeth and said, No, I have to go find him. Sister Zi Yuan, wait here, lest he gets anxious again when he comes back and doesn't see us. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, No, I'll go. You've made too many enemies in the cultivation world. It'll be better if I go. Su Chan hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to say something, a green light flashed by, and a figure landed not far away from them. Su Chan fixed her eyes on the figure and saw a handsome boy carrying a black iron fan on his shoulder. He was standing not far away, smiling at her. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? Su Chan thought to herself. Su Chan was overjoyed. She rushed into his arms like a swallow returning to its nest and shouted, Master, you scared me to death. Li Yundong opened his arms, hugged her, and said with a smile, What's wrong? Su Chan cried and laughed at the same time. Why didn't you come back for so long? It's almost dawn. I thought something had happened to you. I was so scared that I almost lost my life. Li Yundong rubbed her hair affectionately and said softly, Silly, how could something have happened to me? As he spoke, he found that Zi Yuan was staring at him not far away. Li Yundong smiled and nodded to Zi Yuan. Are you all right along the way? Zi Yuan didn't want to disturb Li Yundong and Su Chan's reunion just now, so she just watched from the side. At this time, when she saw Li Yundong talking to her, she stepped forward and said, We're all fine. Su Chan wanted to find you just now, but why did you take so long to come back? How did you know we were here? Li Yundong chuckled and said, I was guarding the entrance of the cave. Seeing that there was no news from you for so long, I thought that you must have escaped, so I left the fan of 7 treasures to cover my retreat and slipped away. However, after I escaped from the cave, I didn't run far. I hid in the mountains. When I saw these guys aggressively rushing to Tiannan City, I followed them from afar. Zi Yuan was shocked. They're coming? Where? Li Yundong smiled and said, They came and then went back. I guess they were afraid of the secular mortals around us and didn't dare to fight, so they went back. Zi Yuan had a thoughtful look on her face. She said, It's very possible. As she spoke, She looked at Li Yundong and couldn't help sighing. Why were you so reckless this time? You took chestnuts from the fire among so many cultivators and snatched Renyuan Jindan. Didn't you think about the consequences it would bring to you and your sect? Li Yundong didn't comment. He touched Su Chan's hair, then turned to Zi Yuan and said, I'm sure they won't come tonight. It's windy here. Let's go back first and talk. Zi Yuan had no choice but to nod. As long as Li Yundong was by her side, even if the sky fell, she would only be able to cover it with a quilt. The little girl nodded her head like a chick pecking rice. She giggled and said, Yundong, you were so powerful today. You blocked so many people's pursuit by yourself. Li Yundong chuckled and didn't say anything. He took Su Chan and Zi Yuan back to his balcony. Because Li Yundong's two families were all cultivators, these people didn't have the habit of going through the main door at all. Therefore, no one had a balcony door. Li Yundong landed in his residence and pushed the door open. Li Yundong took a look and saw that the room was dark and frighteningly quiet. The little foxes and the others seemed to have fallen asleep. Li Yundong nodded to Zi Yuan and Su Chan, and the three of them entered the door quietly. Then, they went to Li Yundong's room together. After Li Yundong motioned for Su Chan to close the door, he said to Zi Yuan, You just asked me why I wanted to take risks and snatch this Renyuan Jindan, right? Zi Yuan nodded and said, Yes, you're getting yourself into trouble. Li Yundong didn't get angry. He smiled slightly and asked, Then I want to ask you, even if I don't snatch this Renyuan Jindan, will the Xueqi school let you go? Zi Yuan was stunned and didn't say anything. Li Yundong asked again, Will the Xueqi school let us go? Zi Yuan had a thoughtful look on her face, but she still didn't say anything. Li Yundong said, You've seen it before. The Xueqi school has been forcing you and me time and time again. They are aggressive and don't want to give us a way out at all. In their eyes, we are aliens and should be exterminated. You are a traitor who helps the evildoers do evil and helps the outsiders. Do you think this kind of situation can be reversed? Zi Yuan sighed softly and said, But it's not worth offending so many cultivation sects in the world. Li Yundong laughed and asked, It's strange. Last time, you encouraged me to snatch the Medicine King tripod. This time, I snatched the Renyuan Jindan, but you complain a lot. What's the meaning of this? Zi Yuan sighed and said, How is that the same? With the Medicine King tripod, it's equivalent to having a chicken that lays eggs. You won't starve to death in the future. Anyway, no matter how hungry you are, you will have eggs to eat. It's normal for people to grab a chicken when they're about to starve to death. But the Renyuan Jindan is just an egg. Do you think it's worthwhile to offend almost all the cultivation sects in the world for an egg before you're very hungry? Li Yundong shook his head and said, But we can't deal with the Xueqi school alone. Why should we care about the other sects? Anyway, offending one is offending. Offending a group is also offending. These cultivators just want all the benefits in the world to be theirs. They have nothing to say. But if you get a little benefit, they will be jealous and secretly play tricks on you. Isn't the last time we participated in the tea art competition the best proof? If we don't grab it ourselves and fight for it ourselves, do you expect the other sects to give us a way out? The more Li Yundong spoke, the tougher his tone became. He said rudely, Zi Yuan, don't be silly. There's no turning back for you and me. If we stretch our heads out, we'll be stabbed, and if we shrink our heads, we'll also be stabbed. It's better to take chestnuts out of the fire and grab the Renyuan Jindan to strengthen ourselves. In this day and age, only by strengthening ourselves is the real king. It's absolutely unrealistic to expect these people to show mercy. The longer Su Chan spent with Zi Yuan, the more she respected Zi Yuan's character and character. Seeing that Li Yundong's words had made Zi Yuan speechless, the little girl couldn't bear it. She gently pulled Li Yundong's arm and said, Yundong, don't say that to Sister Zi Yuan. She's doing this for your own good. Li Yundong hadn't expected Su Chan to take the initiative to speak up for Zi Yuan. He chuckled, pinched the tip of the little girl's nose, and said softly, You stay away for a while. I have something to ask Zi Yuan alone. I'll call you in later, okay? Su Chan nodded and looked at Li Yundong eagerly. Then don't be angry at Sister Zi Yuan. If you have something to say, let's talk about it. As she spoke, she turned her face and said to Zi Yuan, Sister Ziyuan, Yundong has a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Don't take it to heart. Li Yundong couldn't help but reach out and slap her round buttocks. He scolded her with a smile. You're being a good person on both sides. I'm the villain. Hurry up and come back in later. Su Chan covered her buttocks with both hands and made a face at Li Yundong. Then, she turned around and went out. Before she closed the door, she stuck her head out and took a look, her eyes rolling. Her smart eyes seemed to be saying, Yundong, don't be angry at Sister Ziyuan. Li Yundong understood what the little girl was thinking. He scolded her with a smile. You're still looking? If you keep looking, I'll slap you again. Su Chan stuck out her tongue and closed the door. Ziyuan watched Su Chan leave with a smile. She sighed softly and said, You're really lucky to have such an intimate partner like Su Chan. Li Yundong nodded and sighed softly. Yes. Ziyuan smiled and said, What do you want to ask me? Just say it. Li Yundong's expression became serious. He said, Let's start from when we go to Mount Gazao. Ziyuan nodded and said, Okay. Li Yundong asked, I have a few questions. Why did you immediately chase after Su Chan when you heard that it was Chao Yi or Zhuang Yiting when she came out of the room? Ziyuan sighed softly. I knew that with your intelligence, this matter couldn't be hidden from you for long, but I didn't expect you to find out so soon. Li Yundong said with a solemn face. Tell me quickly. This matter is very important and very strange. We followed this person to Gazao sect. Why did Yen Feng appear again? I can understand that Yen Feng has the Liuhe sword in her hand. But why did Yen Feng appear when we chased the Sherbua of Fox Zen School to Gazao sect? If it's just a coincidence, it doesn't make sense. Could it be that Yen Feng is Chao Yi or Zhuang Yiting? Ziyuan nodded slowly and said, You guessed right. Last time when we were eating in the mall, Su Chan and the others went to buy clothes. I didn't want to go with them, but Wan Hongling told me that she had seen second Sherbua Yen Feng nearby. I was shocked and followed her. Later, I found that Sherbua Yen Feng's yang spirit was extremely strong. Her yang spirit had been out of her body for such a long time. If she hadn't found her physical body, it would have been impossible for it to be so strong. Moreover, she knew our actions like the back of her hand, so it was very likely that she had been lurking around us. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he said, Moreover, she had possessed a Moashi before, so you suspect that she is in Fox Zen School. Ziyuan said yes. So I immediately rushed to the locker room to see who was with everyone and who was alone. Second Sherbua's yang spirit had just been possessed, so she couldn't skillfully go out of her body while her physical body was unhindered. She must have hidden alone in a place where no one could see her. So at that time, everyone was outside, and only Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were in the locker room. At that time I suspected them. Hearing this, Li Yundong frowned and said hatefully, This Yen Feng is really determined to destroy our Fox Zen School. It's not enough to kill Moashi. She even possessed Chao Yi or Zhuang Yiting. How hateful! Why didn't you tell me earlier? Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, My reason is the same as when you sent Su Chan away. Li Yundong fell silent. He had sent Su Chan away because he was afraid that she would hear these things and reveal her usual words and deeds. He was also afraid that the little girl would not be able to accept such a blow in her heart. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said unwillingly, I can understand that Su Chan can't hide her words, but I can't be so careless, can I? How could you hide such a big thing from me? If Yen Feng had harmed people during this period of time, how would I explain it to others? Ziyuan sighed. I was sure that Yen Feng wouldn't do anything. She had painstakingly lurked around us. She must have a plan, and it must be a big one. However, this matter is indeed my fault. I will apologize to you first. Li Yundong waved his hand and said, Forget it. It's useless to talk about it now. Let me ask you the second question. However, Ziyuan smiled slightly and asked, You must have a lot of questions. Why don't we ask one each? That would be fairer. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, Well, if you have any questions, ask them. Ziyuan nodded and asked, What are you going to do with the Renyuan Jindan you took back? If I'm not wrong, you should either give it to Su Chan or Zhou Qin, but which one do you want to give it to? This sentence immediately made Li Yundong fall into silence and contemplation. Chapter 382. Go to watch net. Zi Yuan's question rendered Li Yundong speechless for a long time. After a long time, Li Yundong let out a long sigh and asked, "Why don't you want this Renyuan Jin Dan?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "People like us who have cultivated to the Yongshan phase will have no effect on taking elixirs. First we have to cultivate slowly on our own. Second, unless we take the Diyuan Jin Dan, it will be impossible for us to break through the bottleneck in a short time and enter the Jinshan phase. Go to watch net. Therefore, it would be a waste to give this Renyuan Jin Dan to you or me." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said with a troubled expression, "I actually have a preference in my heart, but it's hard to say now. I have to talk to the two of them and ask their opinions before I can make a decision." Seeing that Li Yundong was so embarrassed, Zi Yuan was too embarrassed to make things difficult for him anymore. She said, "Forget it. You can ask your question again." Li Yundong didn't stand on ceremony with her and immediately asked, "Do you think Yan Feng was trying to force us to come out?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, "It's very possible." Li Yundong asked again, "Do you think she deliberately led us to Mount Gazao tonight?" Zi Yuan pondered for a moment and said carefully, "It's possible." Li Yundong frowned. He seemed to be talking to himself as he said, "If she wants to lead us to Mount Gazao on purpose, why would she do that? Since she wanted to lead us there, why did she force us to show up? What good would it do her to force us to show up?" Zi Yuan followed his train of thought and said, "Have you ever wondered why the dead Main Yang would reappear in front of us? If the Main Yang we saw was real, then who was the dead one?" Li Yundong clapped his hands and said in a deep voice, "You've asked the key question. I suspect that the dead Main Yang was a substitute or a Liujia Yang spirit talisman. Since the Liujia Yang spirit talisman can transform into a living person, why can't it transform into a corpse that has been sucked dry?" A look of admiration appeared on Zi Yuan's face as she praised, "You're right. That's very possible." Li Yundong was encouraged. He became spirited and said, "Moreover, we saw a mysterious person rescue Main Yang and trap us with the immortal tying rope. I've seen this person in the secret chamber of the Fox Zen School. Who do you think he is?" Zi Yuan frowned imperceptibly. She hesitated for a moment, then shook her head and said, "I can vaguely guess, but I can't say for sure." Li Yundong said, "It's hard for you to say. Then write his name on your palm, and then I'll write one too. Let's see if we have the same idea." Zi Yuan nodded and said, "All right." After that, she picked up a pen in Li Yundong's room, wrote a word on the palm of her hand, and then handed it to Li Yundong. After Li Yundong finished writing, they stretched out their palms together. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the word Lu was written on Zi Yuan's palm, while the word Yi was written on his palm. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Li Yundong closed his palm and said, "If this person is the former leader, Lu Yi, then there will be more problems." Zi Yuan rubbed the palm of her other hand gently, and the word in her palm disappeared. Zi Yuan nodded and said, "You're right. Why did Lu Yi pretend to be dead at that time? Why did he pass the Fox Zen School to you? Why was he with Wan Zhenyuan of the Gazao sect? Why did his appearance and figure change so much? Why did he set up a false scene of killing Zhang Sun Hong and Main Yang? Why did he save Main Yang? Why did he tie us up with the immortal tying rope?" Faced with so many questions, Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh. He smiled bitterly and said, "I didn't expect that I would cause so much trouble as the leader of the Fox Zen School." Zi Yuan said coldly, "Li Yundong, don't underestimate these things. My second sherbua, Yan Feng, has repeatedly warned me that there will be a great calamity in the cultivation world. Moreover, didn't you suspect that someone has been following us? Moreover, this person also stole the bodies of the 2 golden snakes. Now it seems that it is very likely that Lu Yi stole the bodies of the 2 golden snakes. If I'm not wrong, there must be a great calamity brewing in the cultivation world, and the one who started this calamity was either my second sherbua, Yan Feng, or Lu Yi and Wan Zhenyuan." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "You're right. Lu Yi stole the 2 big golden snakes, and it's very likely that he gave them to Wan Zhenyuan to refine the Diyuan Jindan. But why does he want to refine the Diyuan Jindan? For his own use? What good will it do him to do so many things?" As Li Yundong spoke, he suddenly felt a strong sense of unhappiness in his heart. He had taken over the Fox Zen School in the face of danger, but in the end, He had found that he had been used by others. This feeling made him very unhappy. Zi Yuan seemed to notice Li Yundong's emotions. She comforted him softly and said, "If you don't want to be used, don't be the leader." Li Yundong let out a long sigh and said, "I didn't become the leader for myself. Although it's indeed very cool to bring such a group of beautiful foxes in and out, if it weren't for Xueqi, I would never have become the leader of the sect. She has lost her master now. If the Fox Zen school also suffers a calamity in my hands, I really don't know how to face her. Moreover, although Lu Yi faked his death in the Fox Zen school, he doesn't necessarily have evil intentions. Moreover, I believe that the other people in the Fox Zen school don't know about Lu Ye's fake death. In fact, most of them are like Xueqi, innocent and pure. If I abandon them, I'm afraid that they will be doomed eternally." Zi Yuan was stunned. She couldn't help but show strong appreciation and admiration in her eyes. She said, "Yes, this is a good man who is affectionate and righteous. After getting along with them these days, I can feel that the Fox Zen school is very dependent on you. If you abandon them at this time, they will definitely not be able to accept this fact and the consequences." Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, I can only hide it from them and protect them secretly, especially Xueqi and Zhou Qin. I owe them the most, so I can't let them get hurt at all." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Then what do you want to do in the future? The cultivators we offended tonight, although they didn't immediately come to fight us, which means that they have accepted the fact that Renyuan Jindan was stolen by us, they will definitely not let it go. In my opinion, if they want to retaliate against us, there are only a few ways." Li Yundong's expression was solemn. "Go ahead, I'm listening." Zi Yuan stretched out a slender finger and said, "First, they come to challenge us and privately arrange a secret place to settle their grievances. This is unlikely, because as long as we are in a place with more mortals in the secular world, the more they can't do anything to us. We can just refuse them." Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. What's the second way?" Zi Yuan stretched out a second finger and said, "Second, they can sneak attack you, just like what you encountered before." Li Yundong snorted and said, "Then let them come. As long as they don't attack the other people of the Fox Zen school." Zi Yuan said, "The cultivators we offended tonight are all famous people. Although some of them are shameless and wretched, they won't do such a thing. Otherwise, if word gets out, their reputations will be ruined." Li Yundong was slightly relieved. "If that's the case, that's good. What about the third way?" Zi Yuan raised a third finger and said, "Third, the Taoist assembly will be held in a while. They will definitely invite us. If we don't participate, all the Taoist sects in the world will come to make trouble for us, because everyone will think that we are weak and easy to bully. Most of the cultivation sects only have a cold relationship of the law of the jungle, and there is no such thing as helping the weak. Beating a drowning dog had always been their way of doing things. But if we participate, they will be able to attack you openly. This is also the dilemma I am most worried about." Li Yundong laughed and clapped his hands. He said, "What's there to worry about? As the saying goes, if you know there is a tiger on the mountain, you will go there. These people are hoping that we won't go, so I will go. Not only will I go, but I will also let these people see that I, Li Yundong, am not easy to bully. Our Fox Zen school is not a soft persimmon that anyone can pinch at will." Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said, "Fourth, and also the last point, if they can't use force, they will definitely use force. They will suppress us in business, run on us, and cut off our source of income." Li Yundong frowned and said in a low voice, "This is what I'm most worried about. The other sects are powerful, and your previous connections have been cut off by the Zhengyi school. In this regard, we are at an absolute disadvantage and are likely to suffer a great loss." Seeing that Li Yundong was worried, Zi Yuan persuaded him softly, "In fact, there's no need to worry. As the saying goes, when soldiers come, we will deal with them. As long as they don't come directly to us, we will have a way to deal with them. Besides, if the worst comes to the worst, we can just close this shop and find other ways to make money. There are many ways to make money in the world, so there's no need to fight with them." After hearing Zi Yuan's words, Li Yundong chuckled and said, "It's not that easy for them to cut off our source of income. The secular world is not like the cultivation world. It is reasonable and has rules. How can they be allowed to act recklessly?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "It's naturally better if you can accept it. I'm just afraid that you will do something wrong on impulse because you can't accept it." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Do I look like such a person?" Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong and said, "Aren't you? You were so impulsive that you almost committed suicide in the Gazao sect and even yelled at me. Have you forgotten it so quickly?" Li Yundong raised his head and laughed dryly. "That was an accident. An accident." As he spoke, he looked at Zi Yuan's beautiful face with interest and said with a smile, "Will Fairy Sister also settle accounts after autumn?" Hearing this, Zi Yuan was stunned and rolled her eyes at Li Yundong angrily. "What? Am I not a human? I've never been yelled at like this in my life." Li Yundong quickly smiled apologetically and said, Okay, I was wrong. Fairy Sister, please forgive me this time. Fairy Sister's great kindness, I can't repay it even if I work like an ox or a horse." Zi Yuan snorted. She opened her mouth to ridicule Li Yundong, but suddenly felt that it was a little inappropriate to talk to him like this. It was like two young lovers flirting. Zi Yuan's ears suddenly became a little hot and red. She didn't dare to stay any longer. She walked to the door, turned her head, and said, "I'm going to call Su Chan in. If you have something to say it to her. I'm leaving." Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan's expression was both angry and happy. Her cheeks were even more pink, and there was a rare charm flowing in the corners of her eyes. It was really indescribably moving. His heart skipped a beat, and he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He watched helplessly as Zi Yuan went out the door, but he couldn't say a word. After Zi Yuan went out the door, she saw Su Chan sitting on the sofa in the living room. The little girl lowered her head and swung her legs gently. Her eyes were looking at her shaking toes, as if she was thinking about something. When Su Chan heard the door open, she raised her head and saw Zi Yuan coming out. Her eyes lit up and she went up to her. "Sister Zi Yuan, Yundong didn't say anything about you, did he?" Zi Yuan looked at Su Chan's innocent face. For some reason, she suddenly had an inexplicable feeling in her heart. At this time, she didn't want to face this girl. Zi Yuan's eyes were a little evasive as she said, "No, well, Li Yundong asked you to go up." As she said this, she hurriedly left Li Yundong's residence, jumped from the balcony back to her residence like a thief, and quickly entered her room. As soon as she closed the door, Zi Yuan let out a long sigh of relief. She leaned her back against the door, her chest rising and falling, and her eyes sparkling. There seemed to be a different taste and feeling coming from her soft chest and beating heart. This was a feeling she had never experienced in her life. This feeling was like wild grass in spring, spreading rapidly, making her chest feel numb and soft. Especially when she and Li Yundong had been tied together before, Li Yundong's strong and broad chest had pressed against her soft chest, which had made her feel hot all over and weak all over. Once again, she had been attacked, which had made the usually calm and tranquil fairy's heart feel like it was a tangled mess. The spirit mirror is easy to break, and the immortal sword can't cut the red rope. "Master, what is the meaning of your psalm?" Zi Yuan pressed her hands against her chest and softly murmured this fateful psalm. Her eyes were lost in thought as she stared blankly at the empty room. For a moment, she was a little lost. Chapter 383. Go to watch net. After Zi Yuan left Li Yundong's room, Su Chan was keenly aware of Zi Yuan's strangeness. She watched Zi Yuan leave, then quietly entered Li Yundong's room and carefully closed the door. "Go to watch net." Su Chan rushed to Li Yundong like a thief and said, "Master, I'm here." Seeing her like this, Li Yundong immediately laughed and waved to her. "Girl, come to your master's side." Su Chan smiled sweetly and snuggled up to Li Yundong's side. She blinked her eyes and looked at her partner lovingly. The little girl said softly, "Yundong, you didn't quarrel with Sister Zi Yuan just now, did you?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Don't be silly. Zi Yuan is my teacher and friend. She has done too much for me. I can't even respect her enough. How could I quarrel with her? Even if she is in the wrong, I will let her have her way." Hearing this, Su Chan was relieved and said with a sweet smile, "That's good. Sister Zi Yuan's sect was sealed for us. I was so afraid that you would quarrel and make her homeless. I have been driven out before, so I know how it feels to be homeless." Hearing this, Li Yundong sighed in his heart. He gently hugged Su-chan and gently stroked her black hair with his big hand. You are so kind. You think of others in everything. Su-chan blinked and said, because Sister Zi Yuan is such a person. She thinks of others in everything, but never herself, so I respect her very much and want to learn from her. Li Yundong chuckled and said, well, then you should also worship Zi Yuan as your master. Linggong sect will also have one more disciple. Su-chan twisted her body and said coquettishly, no, I want to worship Zhenren Li as my master. As she said this, she grabbed Li Yundong's right hand and pretended to bow down. Master, disciple Su-chan greets you. Li Yundong burst into laughter and held the little girl in his arms. He said softly, girl, let's stop fooling around. I happen to have something to tell you. Su-chan giggled, put her arms around his waist, and buried her face in his chest. She greedily sniffed his strong manly scent and said, go ahead, I'm listening. Li Yundong knew that the little girl was born to be playful. Other than practicing kung fu, it was almost impossible for her to stay still for even a minute. Li Yundong smiled and didn't force her. He just held her in his arms and whispered, help me think about it. Who should I give this Renyuan Jindan to? Upon hearing this, Su-chan immediately froze. Countless images flashed through her mind. Her master snatched the Renyuan Jindan and gave it to her to take away. Then, Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling chased after her. She ran all the way until she met Li Yundong. Then, in order to escape, she threw the Jindan into Li Yundong's mouth, which led to Li Yundong taking the Renyuan Jindan by mistake. She had also made up her mind to squeeze Li Yundong dry, and then slowly got to know him and fall in love with him. These days, little by little, were like a trotting horse lantern in front of Su-chan's eyes. The little girl's mind was like a mirror. She knew that the reason why she and Li Yundong could fall in love with each other in this life was all because of the Renyuan Jindan. She had lost the Renyuan Jindan, but she had gained Li Yundong, a partner who she loved deeply. How could the gains and losses be clearly described in 3 days and 3 nights? Now that the Renyuan Jindan had appeared in front of her again, what should she choose? Su-chan was lost in thought. Li Yundong didn't rush her. He just looked at her lovingly, like a powerful guardian god, silently guarding her, not letting her get hurt at all. Gradually, Su-chan's eyes slowly became clear. She got up from Li Yundong's arms and sat up straight. Her expression was surprisingly serious. She grabbed Li Yundong's hand and said, Yundong, you've already made up your mind, haven't you? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, I just have a general inclination, but I haven't decided yet. I want to hear your opinion. Su-chan said seriously, then I'll tell you what I think. Li Yundong nodded. Well, I'm listening. Su-chan fixed her eyes on Li Yundong and said word by word, I want to give this Renyuan Jindan to Sister Xueqi. Li Yundong asked curiously, why don't you keep it for yourself? Why do you want to give it to her? You know, you should have gotten this Renyuan Jindan. I took your Renyuan Jindan by mistake, and as a result, you couldn't change from a 3-tailed fox spirit to a 6-tailed fox spirit. This should have been yours in the first place. Now it's just returning it to its rightful owner. Su-chan shook her head and grabbed Li Yundong's hand even harder. No, I don't think so. At that time, I really coveted the Renyuan Jindan, especially before I met you. Every day, I longed to become a great cultivator like the mystical silver fox. But when I met you, I slowly realized that there are things in this world that are more interesting than cultivation. It turns out that there is such a happy and beautiful thing in this world, that there is someone who loves you and loves you. The girl's eyes were a little blurred. She said in a daze, I think that this must be the blessing that I have cultivated for several lifetimes. That's why I met you. God made me lose the Renyuan Jindan, but he made me get you. It can be seen that God is fair. Only when there is sacrifice can there be gain. But now, if I get the Renyuan Jindan, I'm afraid that I will lose you again. Su-chan threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and murmured, Sir, you can't leave me. I can't live without you. Li Yundong was moved when he heard Su-chan's words. He suddenly remembered the days when he had been with Su-chan when he was at his lowest. He also remembered the girl's heart-wrenching cry when he and Su-chan had been forced to separate. Yundong, you must become stronger. Li Yundong's eyes were a little hot and wet. He smiled and patted the girl's back, saying softly, Don't be silly. I'm very strong now. No one can separate us. You don't have to worry about that. Xueqi shook her head and said, No, it's not just that. I said that I want to give the Renyuan Jindan to Sister Xueqi for other reasons. Li Yundong asked in confusion. Then tell me more. Xueqi said again, if I take the Renyuan Jindan, it will take me 3 months to digest it. Even with your help, it will still take at least 2 months. Yundong, you sent me away before. Although you didn't say it, I understood what you were thinking. You were just afraid that I would be worried because so many strange things happened tonight. Moreover, we snatched the Renyuan Jindan in front of so many cultivators tonight, so we will definitely make a lot of enemies. Therefore, we should give the Renyuan Jindan to the person who can absorb it the fastest in a short period of time and become the strongest cultivator the fastest. Xueqi said very seriously, I am a fox spirit. My normal cultivation speed is naturally slower than that of pure human beings. Moreover, my aptitude is not as good as Sister Xueqi's. She was born to be a Xianyin virgin furnace, and now she has your Jindan's qi in her body. Taking the Renyuan Jindan for her can be said to complement each other and get twice the result with half the effort. I believe that with your guidance and the help of the Renyuan Jindan, with Sister Xueqi's aptitude, she will definitely be able to reach the Xueqi phase within a month. When the Taoist assembly comes, she will definitely be of great help to you. Li Yundong was very emotional when he heard this. He looked at Xueqi with a complicated look in his eyes and thought to himself, this girl is usually careless, as if she was born to be careless and a little silly, but in fact, she is meticulous and intelligent. She is no less intelligent than anyone else. She can see the current situation more clearly than anyone else, and her heart is like a mirror. Li Yundong said softly, don't you feel sorry for her at all? Aren't you jealous of her at all? However, Xueqi smiled sweetly. She held Li Yundong's arm and said with a smile, she should be jealous of me. Because I have you. As long as you are by my side, I will be satisfied with everything. I have nothing else to ask for. As she said this, the little girl stuck out her tongue and said mischievously to Li Yundong's right hand, Master, it's just hard on you. I'm afraid you'll have to practice the 5 dragons embracing pillar magic kung for a long time. Li Yundong chuckled. He pinched the little girl's nose and said with a straight face to scare her. Nonsense, it's obviously you who is practicing the 5 dragons embracing pillar magic kung. Xueqi's cheeks flushed and she giggled. She burrowed her head into Li Yundong's arms and refused to raise her head. You only know how to bully me. You're so annoying. Li Yundong smiled and said, don't worry. Since you are so generous to give the Renyuan Jindan to Xueqi, I won't let you suffer a loss. We also heard Wan Zhenyuan say that he was going to refine the Dun Jindan. When the Dun Jindan is born, we will snatch it from him. At that time, the Dun Jindan will be given to you. You can't push it to others. I'm still waiting for you to succeed in your cultivation and fly with you. Do you have the heart to watch him be a widow for the rest of his life? Xueqi giggled. The Dun Jindan? It's too difficult to refine. I don't believe he can do it. Li Yundong smiled and didn't comment. After being intimate with the little girl for a while, he said softly to her, since you have made up your mind, I will give the Renyuan Jindan to Xueqi. It's not too late for you to regret it now. Xueqi took out the Renyuan Jindan from her arms. In an instant, the room was filled with golden light, which was unusually bright. She handed the Jindan to Li Yundong without hesitation, shook her head hard, and said seriously, no, Sister Xueqi has done more for you than I have. This is what she deserves. If I am really destined to take this elixir, there will be more in the future. Li Yundong nodded slowly and said with admiration, I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to get over it, but I didn't expect my girl to be so righteous and open-minded. It's really rare. I'm really lucky. Xueqi giggled and said, then you have to make more delicious food for me to compensate me. Li Yundong laughed. You only know how to eat. Well, you stay in the room. I'll go find Xueqi and see if she's asleep. As he said this, Li Yundong held the Renyuan Jindan in his hand and turned to go out. Thank you to the children who voted for me. I have regained the 3rd place. You are so awesome. Tang Tang bowed to express his gratitude. Chapter 384. Go to watch net. Xueqi and Su Chan shared a room, and their residence was not very far from Li Yundong's. When Li Yundong came to the door, he gently knocked on it. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. These days, Xueqi had been learning some of the most basic cultivation kung fu from Su Chan. She already had some yuan qi in her body, so her foundation was much better than that of ordinary people. Therefore, she had already begun to cultivate qi. Although she hadn't practiced for many days, her 5 senses were much sharper than before. Moreover, her body felt lighter and stronger, and her energy was more abundant. As soon as he knocked on the door, Xueqi immediately woke up from her meditation. She asked in a low voice, "Who is it?" Li Yundong said softly, "It's me." Although he didn't say his name, Xueqi was very familiar with his voice. She didn't understand why Li Yundong would come to her so late at night and when she was alone in a room. Xueqi got up in surprise and suspicion. Her heart was beating wildly as she walked to the door and gently opened it. Sure enough, she saw Li Yundong standing at the door with his hands behind his back, looking at her with a deep gaze. What is he doing here? Xueqi panicked and stood at the door in a daze. Li Yundong saw Xueqi standing at the door in snow-white pajamas. She was like a water lily, blooming faintly. She was extremely delicate, completely devoid of her usual cold and reserved temperament. Li Yundong smiled and asked, "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Xueqi let out a cry, as if she had just woken up from a dream. She blushed and made way for him. Li Yundong entered the room and looked around. He saw 2 fragrant beds on the left and right sides of the 2 girls' boudoirs. A refreshing fragrance wafted into his nostrils. There was a desk in the middle of the bed, on which various Taoist classics were neatly placed. One of them had been opened, and it was full of delicate annotations. Obviously, it was Xueqi's notes when she was reading. Li Yundong chuckled. He picked up a book and flipped through it, only to see that it was Inner Canon of the Yellow Emperor. However, Xueqi had added her own annotations next to Li Yundong's annotations. Li Yundong nodded to himself and said to Xueqi, "Not bad, you are very hard-working." Xueqi didn't know what he wanted to do in her room in the middle of the night. She was a little uneasy and said in a panic, "Master, it's so late. What's the matter?" Only then did Li Yundong realize that it was indeed inappropriate for him to come to her room alone so late at night. He coughed dryly and said, "I do have something to do. Close the door and I'll talk to you." Xueqi's heart pounded violently. A kind of emotion that had been strongly suppressed in her heart suddenly burst out uncontrollably. The usually arrogant and beautiful girl's face was flushed. Her body trembled slightly as she closed the door. Her heart was in turmoil as she said in a trembling voice, "Master, what's the matter?" Seeing Xueqi like this, Li Yundong felt a little regretful in his heart. He felt that he shouldn't have come to her at this time. As a result, he had made her think too much. But on second thought, Li Yundong thought that Xueqi's deep love for him was really shocking, and he couldn't bear it. Li Yundong sighed to himself. He stretched out the hand holding the Renyuan Jindan, spread his palm, and said to Xueqi, "Come on, eat this." Xueqi saw a round pill rolling in Li Yundong's palm. The pill was shining with golden light, and the light illuminated the room. Her eyes suddenly widened. Although she was puzzled, she did not hesitate to pick up the Jindan from Li Yundong's palm and swallow it without saying a word. This Renyuan Jindan was about the size of a thumb. When she swallowed it without water, she immediately choked and coughed again and again, and her face turned red. Li Yundong was angry and amused at the same time. He patted her on the back and pointed his finger at the Renying acupoint near her throat, making her throat muscles relax. The Jindan was swallowed by Xueqi. Although Xueqi had swallowed the Jindan, she still choked with tears in her eyes and kept patting her chest. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Are you taking medicine or committing suicide? You have to drink water to take the pill." Xueqi straightened up and forced a smile at Li Yundong. Her eyes were slightly dim as she said softly, "Master, did you come to me so late just to make me eat this?" Li Yundong saw that Xueqi had no idea what she had eaten. He shook his head and said, "You know what I gave you, so why did you swallow it? What if it was poison?" Xueqi smiled slightly, her smile full of bitterness and sweetness. "I will gladly endure the poison you gave me." Li Yundong was silent when he heard this. He sighed softly, pulled out the chair in front of the desk, and sat down. Then he patted her bed and said softly, "Xueqi, sit down and listen to me." Xueqi sat down gently and looked at Li Yundong. She didn't say a word and waited for his words in silence. Li Yundong thought for a moment and began to talk about how he had met Su Chan and how he had taken the Renyuan Jindan by mistake. He talked about how they had snatched the Renyuan Jindan in a scuffle in the Gazao sect tonight. Li Yundong said, "It can be said that the reason why I, Li Yundong, have changed from an ordinary person to a cultivator with a little fame now is entirely because I took the Renyuan Jindan you just took." Only then did Xueqi realize how precious and magical the thing she had just swallowed was. She subconsciously touched her throat with her hand and said in a tight voice, "Why did you give it to me? Why didn't you give it to Su Chan? Isn't it supposed to be hers?" Li Yundong said softly, "No, Su Chan and I discussed it. We both think that it's best for you to take this Jindan. You have good qualifications and high talent. After taking the Jindan you can grow faster. And," Xueqi suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "and you feel that you owe me a lot, don't you?" Li Yundong was silent. After a while, he slowly nodded and said, "Yes, Xueqi, I do owe you too much, so this is the only thing I can compensate you with. I also promised you that I would give you a brand new life and a brand new world. This Jindan has brought me a brand new life and a brand new world. Now it's time for you to come to this world." Hearing this, Xueqi's eyes suddenly became sore, and more tears welled up in her eyes. She stared at Li Yundong, tears falling down her cheeks. The girl who would rather break than bend choked and sobbed, "This is not fair, this is not fair. Why did you decide for me without even asking me?" Li Yundong opened his mouth and said in a daze, "This is a treasure that no one in the cultivation world doesn't want." You don't want it?" Xueqi suddenly threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and hugged him tightly. She cried bitterly and said, "I'd rather not. I'd rather you owe me for the rest of your life. I don't want you to pay me back." Xueqi's crying was like a hand, tearing Li Yundong's heart apart. His body froze and he let Xueqi hug him. His hands stopped in mid-air. He didn't know whether he should push the girl away from him or hold her tightly. After a long time, Xueqi's tears had soaked the front of Li Yundong's chest. Her emotions slowly calmed down. Xueqi wiped her tears and left Li Yundong's arms. She said in a hoarse voice, "Master, I'm sorry. I lost my composure." Li Yundong looked at Xueqi, who was weeping like a pear blossom, and his heart was heavy. He sighed softly and said, "Xueqi, you are a good." Before Li Yundong could finish his words, Xueqi immediately reached out to cover his mouth. Her tears fell again. "Don't say it. Don't give me a good person card." Li Yundong didn't finish his words. When he heard this, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Xueqi looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes and said, "I gave you a good person card before. You don't have to give it back to me again." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "I didn't mean that." Xueqi suddenly said in a low voice, "Is it because I refused you before so?" Li Yundong quickly shook his head and said, No, absolutely not." Xueqi was silent for a long time. She murmured in a low voice, "I must have been enemies with you in my previous life, so we will also be enemies in this life." Xueqi's voice was extremely soft, like a mosquito. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask, "What?" Xueqi bit her plump and bright red lips hard with her snow-white teeth. Her eyes were full of complicated emotions, which were full of love, resentment, and obsession. She said word by word, "Sweetheart." Li Yundong looked extremely embarrassed. He looked elsewhere and didn't say anything. Xueqi's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Gradually, her weak and sad expression disappeared, replaced by strength and stubbornness. She wiped her tears with her palm, found a hairpin beside the bed, and tied her hair up high, revealing her snow-white, swan-like neck. Xueqi took a slight breath and said calmly, "Master, I know. I will make good use of this Jindan. I won't let you down. What should I do next?" Seeing that Xueqi was no longer forcing him, Li Yundong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He said, "You should meditate first, and then I'll teach you how to use qi." Xueqi asked, "Now?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, now. The power of the Renyuan Jindan dissipates very quickly. Something will happen in a while." Without saying a word, Xueqi turned around and quickly cleaned up the bed. Then she sat cross-legged on it and faced Li Yunyang, preparing to meditate with qi. However, Li Yundong said, "No, you should face the wall with your back to me. I'll help you with your qi later." Xueqi immediately turned around and turned her back to Li Yundong. Just as she was about to sit down, she suddenly felt a heat in her lower abdomen, as if there was a little mouse scurrying back and forth. Xueqi was stunned. She thought that she had been aroused, so she subconsciously didn't dare to say anything. However, it didn't take long for the qi to become stronger and stronger. Gradually, Xueqi felt as if she had fallen into a big furnace, and her whole body was boiling hot. At first, Xueqi could still grit her teeth and hold on, but after a while, she finally couldn't help but moan in pain. Li Yundong was shocked and quickly felt her pulse with his hand. He immediately found that the qi in her body was running around, just like a wild horse out of control. Li Yundong immediately controlled his zhenqi and injected it into Xueqi's body to help her alienate the qi in her body. Li Yundong knew that when he had taken the Renyuan Jindan in the past, it was when he was sleeping. At this time, the Jindan was invading his body, and he didn't know pain or soreness. At this time, there were no other emotions, so the difficulty of Jindan invading his body was easily overcome. But Xueqi was different. First, her emotions had fluctuated greatly and she had been shocked. Then, when she was conscious, she experienced the difficulty of Jindan invading her body. Moreover, when the qi began to run around, she didn't dare to tell Li Yundong because she was a girl. As a result, the qi in her body was in chaos, and she couldn't bear it anymore. Fortunately, the aura of Li Yundong's zhenqi at this time far exceeded the medicinal power of Jindan's qi in Xueqi's body, so he was able to control and guide the qi in her body back to their respective meridians, so that it wouldn't run around and avoid the danger of qigong deviation. After Li Yundong controlled the qi in Xueqi's body, he secretly cried, "That was close." Li Yundong thought to himself, since ancient times, cultivation must have a good teacher, and the reason why Taoist companions are ranked third is because of this. In this situation just now, if I hadn't been by her side, if my zhenqi cultivation hadn't been stronger than the medicinal power of Renyuan Jindan, I'm afraid that Xueqi would have become a cripple from now on. I would have harmed her. When Li Yundong thought that Xueqi would become a cripple because of Jindan invading her body, he couldn't help but feel a little scared and have a lingering fear. Thinking of this, he became more and more serious about protecting Xueqi's cultivation. Just like how Su Chan had guarded Li Jiandong back then, Li Jiandong had stayed by Xueqi's side for 2 days and 2 nights without taking off his clothes or leaving his body. Chapter 385. Go to watch net. While Li Yundong was isolating the qi meridian for Xueqi, Su Chan, who had been waiting outside until dawn, still hadn't seen Li Yundong come out. She paced back and forth in the corridor anxiously. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. The other little foxes of the Fox Zen School had also gotten up early in the morning and were meditating and practicing qi in the living room. Early in the morning, Zi Yuan came to Li Yundong's residence. She saw Su Chan walking around and asked curiously, "Su Chan, what's wrong with you? Are you practicing the 5 animals play early in the morning?" When Su Chan saw Zi Yuan, she hurried forward, pulled her aside, and said in a low voice, "Sister Zi Yuan, Yundong went to Xueqi's room last night and said that he was going to give her the Renyuan Jindan. He hasn't come out yet." Seeing Su Chan's anxiety, Zi Yuan thought that she was worried that Li Yundong wouldn't be able to control himself, so she smiled and advised, "After taking the Jindan, as a master, Li Yundong will definitely be guarding her. You don't have to think too much. Li Yundong is a gentleman. He won't let you down." Su Chan stamped her feet and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, what are you thinking? I'm not talking about that. Of course, I believe in Yundong, but I'm worried that something will go wrong when he's guarding her. When Li Yundong was cultivating in the past, I was guarding him, and we almost went crazy together. I didn't dare to push the door open and go in, for fear of disturbing him. Sister Zi Yuan, your cultivation quotient is high. Can you help me test him?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and comforted her. "Don't worry. Li Yundong's zhenqi is strong and condensed. There won't be any problems. As long as he doesn't meet someone whose cultivation quotient is higher than his, he will be able to control the qi in the other party's body. Xueqi said anxiously, but there's still 1 in 10,000. Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, well, I'll help you go in and have a look. Because pushing the door would make a noise, it was very likely to frighten Xueqi, who was meditating, and Li Yundong, who was guarding her. Therefore, Ziyuan chose to go into the room with her Yin spirit. As soon as she entered the room, Ziyuan found that the whole room was shrouded in a layer of mist. It was filled with a faint fragrance, like the fragrance of medicine, but also like the unique delicate fragrance of a girl. Ziyuan took a closer look and saw that Xueqi was sitting cross-legged on the bed with her back facing Li Yundong. White steam was rising from the top of her head, and her clothes had been soaked in sweat. Li Yundong was standing behind her, pressing the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of her head with one hand, and the fingers of his other hand were flying like butterflies, quickly poking, pressing, or rubbing the various acupoints on Xueqi's back. At this time, there was also a white line of qi rising from the top of Li Yundong's head. However, his line was only as thick as a finger, and it rushed to the ceiling before dispersing in all directions. The white qi above Xueqi's head was rising, dispersing in all directions an inch above the top of her head. Ziyuan knew that Li Yundong was taking advantage of the opportunity of Jindan body cleansing to help Xueqi complete the cultivation of the first heaven of shaping the body, the second heaven of meridian cleansing, and the second heaven of meridian cleansing. As long as she passed this stage, Xueqi would have completed the primary cultivation of ordinary people and directly entered the intermediate realm of the second heaven. She would then be able to begin visualizing her own god spirit and enter the advanced realm of the second heaven. Ziyuan's Yin spirit looked at Li Yundong's back for a while. She was about to leave when she suddenly heard Li Yundong say, Ziyuan? When Ziyuan saw that Li Yundong still had the energy to talk to her while he was concentrating on Xueqi's meridian cleansing and expanding her meridians, she couldn't help but admire him in her heart. She replied, it's me. Xueqi saw that you hadn't come out all night and was afraid that something had happened to you while you were guarding Xueqi, so she asked me to take a look. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, I know. Have you seen the sweat all over Xueqi's body? Ziyuan nodded. Yes, it's normal for her to sweat so much when Jindan body cleansing. Li Yundong said, yes, Xueqi's physique is special. Her kidney fire is strong, and the Yin qi in her body is extremely heavy. The Yang qi of Jindan is very powerful, and the Yin qi of Yin and Yang qi are attacking her back and forth in her body, causing the qi in her body to surge and her body to sweat a lot. This room is airtight, so the sweat on her body won't dry for a long time. I'm afraid that the moisture will invade her body and cause her a permanent illness, which will cause trouble for her cultivation in the future. Go out and help me find some towels. As a cultivator, Ziyuan was also an experienced person. She naturally knew how great the impact of moisture on cultivation was. She nodded and answered. Her Yin spirit quickly left the room and returned to her body. As soon as Ziyuan opened her eyes, she said to Xueqi, don't worry, Li Yundong is expanding Xueqi's meridian cleansing. I'll go find some towels. You wait here. However, Xueqi stopped her and said, I'll go. It didn't take long for the little girl to find 3 dry towels. She handed them to Ziyuan and said softly, Sister Ziyuan, you can go. Ziyuan saw that Xueqi's voice was a little loud, as if she was afraid of disturbing Li Yundong. She couldn't help but smile and say, push the door open and go in. It's okay. My Yin spirit was discovered by him when I entered the room, and he even talked to me. Just be gentle and don't disturb Xueqi. Xueqi blinked her eyes and hesitated for a while. Then, she boldly pushed the door open and stuck her head out to take a look inside. As soon as she opened the door, she saw a gust of mist rushing out. The figures of Li Yundong and Xueqi were looming in the mist. Li Yundong felt that someone was peeping at him at the door, but he didn't have the courage to come in. He immediately knew that this person must be Xueqi. He said in a deep voice, Choner? Ziyuan asked you to bring the towels? Xueqi saw that Li Yundong didn't even turn his head. He knew what was happening outside the room like the back of his hand. She secretly stuck out her tongue and whispered in admiration, You're really amazing. You know what's going on without looking or listening. She walked into the room quietly and said softly, Do you want the towels? Help me wipe the sweat off her body. Be gentle and don't disturb her. Li Yundong stared at the meridians of Xueqi's neck, as if he could sense the changes in her body through the beating meridians under her skin. Su-chan stuck out her tongue and said, "How light is light? I can't do it. Do it yourself." Li Yundong shouted in a low voice. "Didn't you do it for me before?" Su-chan said softly, "You were a man, and you fell asleep at that time. I didn't care how heavy it was, but now Xueqi is just meditating. How can it be the same? Moreover, you have control of her qi, so you know how heavy it is. Naturally, it's best for you to do it. Moreover, she is your disciple, so of course you have to do it yourself." Li Yundong frowned slightly, but he knew that it was not the time to hesitate and be pedantic, so he said decisively, "Okay, you lift her clothes." Ah! Su-chan blinked her eyes and looked at Li Yundong in surprise. But when she saw Li Yundong's serious expression, she immediately knew that she had misunderstood. The little girl stuck out her tongue and secretly blamed herself. Su-chan, how can you not believe me? During cultivation, the teaching of kung fu between a master and his disciple is an extremely private and intimate thing. Don't you know that?" Su-chan walked over quietly, put the towel in a place where Li Yundong could reach, and then gently helped Xueqi lift the clothes on her back. Xueqi was wearing pajamas, which were loose, and she wasn't wearing any underwear. As soon as the clothes were lifted, her jade-like back was immediately revealed. Although Su-chan was also a peerless beauty, she saw that Xueqi's back was smooth and flawless, like a piece of natural white marble, without a single flaw. The hair on her back was so thin that it was almost impossible to see with the naked eye, and the curve of her back was even more gentle and beautiful. Even Su-chan's heart palpitated and she sighed inwardly. Su-chan was amazed, but Li Yundong seemed to be really facing a stone. He quickly reached out, picked up the towel, and then quickly swept it over Xueqi's body. At this time, Li Yundong's whole body and mind were devoted to expanding Xueqi's meridians. In his eyes, he could only see the flow of qi inside the human body, but he couldn't see the beauty of the human body. After wiping the sweat off Xueqi's back, he threw the towel out the door and said neatly, "Change." Zi Yuan caught the towel at the door, but she felt that it was heavy and full of sweat. She was shocked and thought to herself, Li Yundong's priorities just now were simply wonderful. Not only did he wipe the sweat off Xueqi's back, but he also didn't disturb her. He really has the agility and elegance of a swallow cutting the water. Amazing, really amazing. No wonder he was able to use the Lyoha sword to transmit the heavenly thunder the moment it struck down and accurately hit the fairy-tied rope. Last time, I thought it was a fluke, but now it seems that Li Yundong's control of strength has reached an amazing level. Thinking of this, Zi Yuan couldn't help looking at Li Yundong with respect and admiration. She turned around and wanted to go to the bathroom to wash and change the towel, but she saw that at this time, the other people of the Fox Zen School and Ruan Hongling had all come downstairs. They all looked at her eagerly, as if they wanted to know what had happened upstairs. Zi Yuan whispered to the crowd, "Li Yundong is expanding Xueqi's meridians. Don't talk loudly, lest you disturb him." Only then did everyone understand. They whispered to each other. Ruan Hongling winked at Zi Yuan and whispered, "Sister Zi Yuan, where did you go last night? I went to your room to look for you, but you weren't there." Zi Yuan looked around and saw the 3 Sherbois of the Fox Zen School standing with the little foxes. They all looked up at Li Yundong's room with worried and nervous eyes. She whispered to Ruan Hongling, "I'll tell you about it later. It's not convenient now." Ruan Hongling nodded in understanding. She asked again, "Then I'll go to Li Yundong's room and take a look. I won't say anything. Is that okay?" Zi Yuan nodded and whispered, "Be careful. Li Yundong is fine, but Xueqi must not be disturbed. Otherwise, all our efforts will be in vain." Ruan Hongling made a gesture to Zi Yuan to show that she understood. She went upstairs quietly and came to the door to take a look inside. She saw that Su-chan had simply helped Xueqi take off her pajamas, while she stood to the side and was responsible for holding the towel for Li Yundong. Li Yundong was still staring at the pulse of Xueqi's neck. He took the towel from Su-chan's hand and swept it over Xueqi's back. Then, without looking at it, he threw it to the door and said in a low voice, "Change." Ruan Hongling saw a towel flying toward her. She quickly caught it and was angry in her heart. This guy usually doesn't get along with me, but I didn't expect him to order me around like a maid. I'm so angry. But she also knew that this was not the time to lose her temper. She snorted in her heart, turned around, and wanted to go downstairs. Just as Wan Hongling was about to leave, she suddenly found a faint medicinal fragrance coming from the towel. At this time, Zhou Qin's body suddenly began to bloom with a burst of 5-colored brilliance. Wan Hongling was shocked and blurted out, "Jin Dan fusing the body? This is Renyuan Jin Dan?" Her exclamation caused a commotion among the people of the Fox Zen school downstairs. The big and small foxes were all stunned, especially the little foxes, who said one after another, "Renyuan Jin Dan? Who's taking the Renyuan Jin Dan up there? Is it the leader? What does Renyuan Jin Dan look like? Let's go and have a look." I'll make a small advertisement and warmly recommend Meng Po's Red Book, Wrong Love, Evil President. Everyone is welcome to take a look. Chapter 386. Go to Watch Net. Just as the little foxes were about to swarm upstairs, Xueqi suddenly scolded in a low voice, "Bastard! Do you want sect leader to suffer from qi deviation?" At this time, Zhuang Yiting also stood up and glared at the little foxes. "Don't you know when to make trouble? You really have no sense of propriety." She looked at Xueqi meaningfully and then at Zhuang Yiting. She nodded slightly to them and then went upstairs. She took the towel from Wan Hongling's hand and said softly, "Give it to me. You can stay here and keep an eye on her. You don't have to close the door. Anyway, they are all women. I'm not afraid of being exposed. It's better to have some fresh air in the room." Watch Net. 7K. O.M. Wan Hongling glanced at Zhou Qin, her eyes full of strong envy. She said softly, "It's true that different people have different fates. She's really lucky. She has Renyuan Jin Dan to take and 2 masters to protect her. Humph, I'm not so lucky." Zi Yuan pointed at Wan Hongling's forehead with her finger, glared at her, and scolded softly, "Don't you have the nerve to say that? You've been fed elixirs and drank medicinal soup since you were young. Do you think you've eaten less of these things? How heartless." Zhou Qin could take the Renyuan Jin Dan because it was her destiny. As the saying goes, 1's destiny, 2 are luck, 3 are geomancy, 4 are accumulating in virtue, 5 are reading, 6 are famous, and 8 are worshipping the gods. There were 10 things in life that could change a person the most. The first was fate. Some things are destined by fate, and you can't force it. It's useless even if you envy it so much that you can see through it. You're a cultivator, but you can't even see through this. Wan Hongling made a face. "You think I don't know? I was just casually talking about it, yet you gave me such a long lecture. Humph, so boring." While the two of them were talking, Li Yundong threw another towel and shouted in a low voice, "Change." Zi Yuan hurriedly threw the dry towel in her hand to Su Chan, then walked to the bathroom to change, and then dried it with her own zhenqi. After repeating this dozens of times, the sweat on her body slowly stopped, and the colorful light on her body slowly weakened. At this time, not only did Li Yundong not let out a sigh of relief, but he became even more focused. He whispered in her ear and began to guide her to meditate. She began to look at her own aura and began to visualize the things in the spirit space. 2 days later, Li Yunyang helped Zhou Qin advance by leaps and bounds all the way to the advanced realm of Yin spirit, realization, and great freedom in the 3rd heaven. Only then did Zhou Qin's qi become exhausted and she fell into a deep sleep from meditation. Only then did Li Yundong let out a sigh of relief. At this time, he also felt a wave of fatigue attacking him, and his waist was a little stiff. Li Yundong released the hand that had been pressed against the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of her head, then covered her with the quilt. He put her down on the bed, tucked her in and walked out of the room. To his surprise, someone had been waiting at the door of the room for the past 2 days in case he needed any help, but at this time, there was no one at the door. When he walked out of the door and came to the corridor, Li Yundong found that everyone was in the hall, whispering anxiously about something. As soon as Li Yundong came out, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. They all looked up at him. When Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Wan Hongling saw Li Yundong, they were immediately overjoyed. Su Chan said in surprise, "Yundong, you're out? Where's Sister Zhou Qin?" Zi Yuan also smiled and said, "Are you done?" Li Yundong nodded to everyone with a smile and walked down the stairs. His voice was full of exhaustion as he said, "I'm done. Zhou Qin has already fallen asleep. What are you talking about?" At this time, Su Chan's expression immediately turned from joy to worry. She took Li Yundong's hand and said anxiously, "Something happened in the store." Li Yundong was shocked and hurriedly asked, "What happened?" Zi Yuan said softly, "Actually, it's nothing. Don't worry. You've been tired for 2 days. It's not too late to take a rest first." At this time, Su Chan came to her senses and thought, Yundong has been by Zhou Qin's side for 2 days and 2 nights, constantly helping her expand her meridians and guiding her cultivation. Now he's exhausted. Why can't I calm down and make him worry? The little girl also nodded and took Li Yundong's arm. "Yes, Yundong, you'd better take a rest." Li Yundong sighed slightly and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." "What happened?" Seeing that she couldn't dissuade him, Zi Yuan said, "It's just that some of the documents have been blocked by someone. As for the decoration company, all the people under Mr. Han have been poached. Now they can't start the decoration anymore." Li Yundong was stunned. What's going on? After he finished speaking, everyone in the Fox Zen school was also talking about it. The little foxes all looked worried and looked at Li Yundong eagerly, as if they were hoping that he could come up with a good idea. Seeing that they were worried, Li Yundong winked at Zi Yuan and Su Chan. Then he said to Xueqi, Shibua, "Take the disciples to practice first. I have something to say to Zi Yuan and Su Chan in private." Xueqi nodded and took the little foxes to Zi Yuan's residence across the street. Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Su Chan went to his own room. As soon as he entered, Li Yundong didn't wait for Zi Yuan to close the door and asked, "Our documents have been blocked? What exactly is going on? Is there a need for documents to be verified to open a shop?" Since Zhou Qin had been in charge of this matter before, Li Yundong had given her full authority to handle it without asking any questions. At this time, Zhou Qin was sleeping, so Li Yundong didn't know what the problem was. Zi Yuan explained, "To open a shop, you need a business license." Li Yundong said curiously, "Didn't we get it last time? Didn't old lady Su ask her son to help us with it?" Zi Yuan sighed and said, "Li Yundong, it's not that simple. Last time, old lady Su mainly helped us solve the problem of the storefront and rent, but it's not that simple to get a business license. To get a business license, you first need a storefront, then you need all kinds of documents, as well as the lease contract from the Housing Administration Bureau." At this time, Su Chan also interrupted and said, "Last time, Sister Zhou Qin went to get the lease contract from the Housing Administration Bureau, right?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, in short, we need the original and copy of the business license, the code certificate, the land tax certificate, the national tax certificate, the account opening permit." Li Yundong felt a headache coming on. Wait, how can there be so many things? I thought Zhou Qin had settled everything last time. Zi Yuan shook her head and sighed helplessly. "Don't you know where you are? This is China. Don't you know that these officials are waiting for these things to torture you? I haven't finished yet. We need a health permit from the Health Bureau to open a tea house. And the most important thing, which is also the biggest problem they've been choking us with, is we need to have a bank account. This bank account contains our registered capital." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "It's crazy. It's so troublesome to open a shop. Just listening to it gives me a headache. How much does the registered capital cost?" Zi Yuan said, "At least 1 million. Li Yundong took a breath of cold air. 1 million? F***ck. Where can I get 1 million at this time?" Zi Yuan said helplessly, "In fact, this is not a rigid rule. The standard for the fluctuation of registered capital is very high, but now someone wants to mess with us, so the Industry and Commerce Bureau set the standard very high." Li Yundong said angrily, "Who stabbed us in the back? It can't be Director Wang, can it?" Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "I don't think so. I called him before and asked him what was going on. He said that someone above wanted to mess with us, and he couldn't do anything about it." Li Yundong asked, "Did he say who wanted to mess with us?" Zi Yuan said he didn't dare to say, "But I can probably guess." Li Yundong quickly asked, "Who is it?" Zi Yuan sighed and said, "Li Yundong, think about it. You have offended so many sects before, and these sects are more or less powerful. Moreover, now that the country has relaxed the management of the cultivation world has begun to spread and expand into the business and political circles again. Officials and businessmen can collude together. So why can't officials and cultivators collude together? You have to know what officials are most afraid of? They are most afraid of death and old age. And what are cultivators best at? It's good for health and prolonging one's life. Li Yundong suddenly understood and said, I see. No wonder Taoist Li Yi made such a big noise a while ago. Qigong masters, national treasures, and famous doctors were all favored by countless rich businessmen and high officials. It turns out that this is the reason. Zi Yuan said, You have offended so many sects before. Although they don't dare to make trouble for you openly, if you want to open a shop in the secular world, they will have countless ways to deal with you. For example, one of them is to block your neck during the approval of the certificate. Li Yundong snorted coldly and said, What about the decoration company? Is this also the doing of these guys? Zi Yuan said, I don't know about that. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, I'll go to the shop now and see what's going on. Zi Yuan said, Okay, I'll go with you. Su Chan also smiled crisply and said, I'll go too. Li Yundong saw the playful smile on the little girl's face and felt relieved, as if what he had heard before was just a trivial matter. Li Yundong pinched the tip of the little girl's nose with a smile and said, How can you still laugh? Aren't you worried? The little girl held Li Yundong's arm and said coquettishly, What's there to worry about? Last night on Mount Gazao, you made it through such a dangerous situation. My Yundong will definitely be able to turn misfortune into blessing and turn the situation around. Li Yundong laughed and said, You're right. There will be a way out when we get to the mountain. There's nothing to worry about. The group of people went out and took a taxi to the pedestrian street. When they arrived at the shop, Li Yundong saw at a glance that the shop, which had already started construction, was in a mess. There were debris everywhere, especially a small part of the wall that had been smashed, revealing a twisted steel bar, which was particularly dazzling. Zi Yuan frowned slightly. She looked around and said, I called Mr. Han before. He said that he wanted to recruit someone else, but it would take a long time. I'm afraid that we won't be able to open this shop for a while. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Are there no other decoration companies? At this time, Zi Yuan said even more helplessly, I have already contacted several decoration companies in Tianan City, but they are all busy now. Li Yundong was tongue-tied. It can't be such a coincidence, can it? Zi Yuan said, Someone must be playing tricks behind the scenes. Otherwise, it can't be such a coincidence. Li Yundong was about to speak when he suddenly heard the door of the shop being pushed open. An arrogant and harsh voice rang out. Hey, little brother, you're here. Ha ha ha, how is the decoration of the shop going? When Li Yundong heard this, he turned around and saw a middle-aged man holding two coquettish women in his arms, looking at him arrogantly. Who else could it be but Zhao Yuzhen? Well, I accidentally found a picture that looked like a character in this book, so I asked Ziny and Coriander to make it the cover. You can guess which character it is. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.